Hello, everyone. Thanks for checking out the Indy Handshake Wrestling Podcast. My name is Paul Ponte, and I am joined today by Taro, a.k.a.
the best chest in the West, Daddy. I'm here. I'm ready. I haven't talked to anybody in a while in this hood. The horns are locked, cocked, and ready to rock. And you know what? There's no way I can do this for more than an hour. I'm going to get blown up. How you doing? Kevin Lyon here, and now I'm going to look all rattled out.
A.k.a. Kevin Lyon.
I did lose this mask back in 2003, so I can't get away with that.
Yeah.
I tried. I did a couple matches after with the mask on for fun, but
against Super Dragon again as well, also.
Yeah. You can get in trouble in Lucha for sometimes wearing a mask, but after you lose it, but some people get away with it. I mean, Rey Mysterio is the best example of that.
Yeah. Well, that was, See, the difference is when you lost your mask, you took off your horns. When he lost his mask, he put on those little weird horns.
There you go. Exactly.
I don't know what
weird period.
That was a very, very strange period in wrestling. Anyway, how are you doing? How are you enjoying this COVID lifestyle that we are all still living, unfortunately?
I mean, doing what I can to just working, trying to keep a regular 40-hour work week, and just the fun is, we'll probably talk about the Beer Baseball blogcast I do with Disco Machine, Michael Mondragon, and Angelo. I'll plug it, I'm sure, later, but that's like the fun that we do every week, and it's fun to just sit back and talk to you, Paul.
Awesome. That's good to hear. Glad it's not a grind. Sometimes they can be. It depends.
I'll try not to do that for you. I'll give you long-winded.
Oh, that's even better. I prefer long-winded to no-wind at all. Trust me on that.
Fair enough.
So let's go ahead and let's go with the typical start to these podcasts. How we got started in wrestling. What were you into before wrestling, and how did you learn about independent wrestling, which is my favorite part?
All right. So I gotta go way back. I can literally tell you the first day I saw wrestling, and it turned out to be a historical tie-in. I found out later. So in Southern California, I'll say it, I'm 45 years old. So I'm 7 years old, January 1st, New Year's Day, 1983. I don't have cable. Literally, back in those days, you're aware of the Rose Parade, right? The Pasadena Rose Parade. It's so big in Los Angeles. It's on like 6 channels. It's, and I'm just like, I really don't want to watch this. Turn through the channels, and on Channel 9, I see this ring, and I'm watching. I'm like, what is this? And I see this guy climb up onto this rope, and he wears like the little, it's Superfly Snuka, wearing his trunks, and I'm watching this guy. I'm like, what is this? And he does the Superfly splash, and I literally run to the living room, and I'm yelling at my dad. I'm like, oh my God, I just saw this guy jump and fly in the air on this guy, blah, blah, blah. And it turned out my dad actually went to the Olympic Auditorium for wrestling in the 60s. So he would mention, the guys he always mentioned, like Freddie Blassie, Lord Jane Blears, Luthez. And he would say the Sheik, but he always thought he always mixed up the Sheik with the Iron Sheik for some reason. So instantly he was into it. And I actually went to WWF shows as a kid in 83 and 84 at the Olympic Auditorium, the sports arena. And the historical I was going to go back to is I found out that was the very first day, New Year's Day 83, that WWF was on TV in LA. LA was like the first market they went into outside of the New York area, I believe. They had a couple of markets in California because I guess the LA territory was dead at that point. So they took a chance and swept in. And I believe I was at the very first WWF show in LA as like a 7-year-old kid. Met Bob Backlund. It was Bob Backlund, Buddy Rose main event. And he came up to me, said hello. He's like, how you doing, young man? And I'm just like, good match. And that's all I could say. That's all I can get out. I can whimper out. I was just like, and so, just growing up as a fan as a kid, and like I said, I'm going to be long-winded because it's all going to tie back together. Don't worry. The very first indie show I went to was actually in 1985. It was actually a group called California Championship Wrestling that actually had TV locally on Channel 56 here in LA. Nowadays, that was like the station would show all the random, like, world-class wrestling and stuff like that. And they had this local group, and I stumbled upon it. And my parents actually drove me to a TV taping, one of the worst shows I've ever seen, let me tell you. And ironically enough, it was at this place called the Reseda Country Club. And I actually wrestled there 14 years later for XPW for, like, I believe their second ever show. It was either the first, I think it was their second ever show. And it's about a mile from the old Reseda, the Legion Hall.
So XPW is where you visited 2 of your historic landmark buildings.
Exactly. Believe me, yeah. And we get into it later, I mean, we'll get into that later, but long story short, too late, is how it all weirdly tied in was the very first, that was a TV show, but my local paper had an article about Indy show in the sports page. The big football and sports rivalry in Orange County is these 2 high schools named Servite and Mater Dei. So this guy I saw this article in the paper, sports paper, about a wrestling show. And I'm like, what is this? I got to go. And this is, I believe, 1992, I think, or so. And it was at Servite High School. And the idea is the guy representing Servite is going to be the big baby face. He's going to be wrestling the Monarch Mauler, who was like representing Mater Dei. So they took this gimmick of the high school rivalry and used it in the wrestling context. So here's why I mention all this. I go to the show. The guy representing Servite High School was American Wild Child Ron Rivera. I found out years later. How about that?
Oh, wow.
And literally where I sat in the crowd, 1 row in front of me is Mr. Excitement, and I believe Blitzkrieg and a couple of the other guys from that old circle. And I'm like, when I found out years later, we're watching it, like, I was sitting right next to you guys? That's crazy. And then more or less, it all ties back in where, I mean, this is how weird, I guess you could say, things were compared to now technologically wise. Back in the early 90s, it's not like I could meet a wrestling fan, you know what I mean? There was a guy I knew in high school, I met in junior high, and we bonded over wrestling. We went to, he had a satellite dish, we watched wrestling at his place. He's from your parts. I don't know him anymore, but his name's Roy. If you would know Roy Lucier is his name, you probably know who he is. He's a big fan up there. I've seen him around.
That sounds familiar.
If you saw who he is, he'd be out there. But through him, he started trading tapes because he would tape Lucha. We watched Lucha, and I'm talking about The Observer in '92. And back then, it's not like you can meet wrestling fans. There'd literally be a thing called the readers page, and then people with their names and addresses saying, "Oh, I'm looking for this tape. Oh, I'm looking for this and this and this and that." And through pen paling people, this guy Roy met Ron Rivera, American Wild Child. And so I went and met all these guys, and then next thing you know, they're doing backyard trampoline wrestling, and I'm there. I'm like, I don't want to get hurt. I don't want to wrestle. So I refereed, and that's a long story short of how I first got in.
And the legend of Taro was born.
Oh, I can't say legend. Come on, you don't have to go that far. Thank you. Because believe me, I never planned on wrestling. I'm like, oh God, I want to get hurt. Which is funny because you see a match of mine, you're like, really? You didn't?
Yeah.
You know.
I don't know. Did you tell Super Dragon that at some point?
Yeah, I know. Yeah, because that was the whole thing too. Because Dragon, I mean, I think it's pretty well known that we're related. He's my cousin. He's 5 years younger than me. So when I was breaking in, I guess, for lack of a better term, I was like, sure, I'll referee a couple shows. And he was like 14 at the time, and he was into like WWF wrestling. And then through like the stuff that we were into, because we were able to find out, and you're in an area that if you're up north, back in the day, there'd be like Japanese markets or Japanese video stores where you can just go and get All Japan, New Japan TV. Sometimes a video store, you'll find a commercial tape, and you just use all that, and you just slowly get more footage. And we were all getting into like Japanese wrestling and lucha, and that's the whole birth of our whole style. Almost is like in the '90s, we're all discovering this and just trying to figure out what we like and what we don't like. And he's a 14-year-old kid trying to figure this all out, and that's how he slowly got in there. And and I meanwhile just refereeing wherever I could. And let me see. I'm trying to figure out how to tie this all together into how I got started, because that's well, I'm thinking you're one to go long story short on all this.
Oh no, I don't trust me. I actually just I'll even interject right now with a even bigger digression. Actually, very similarly, what I did was I remember there was a video game mom and pop shop near me, which to now especially sounds ridiculous, because you're like, what do you mean it's not GameStop? What else would it be? But it's just like a regular thing. And then what they had was import PS1 games.
Oh man, I think I know where you're going.
And I went there, and all of a sudden I'm like, I like wrestling, and I'm looking through their games, and all of a sudden I see all these Japanese wrestling games, and I'm like, wait, there are other wrestling games besides the ones I've been playing? So I grab them, and I go to the front guy at the front, and he's like, hey, is your PS1 modded? And I'm like, no.
Oh.
He's like, can't play them. And I was like, oh. And he's like, but I'll tell you what, my cousin out of his garage, he puts mod chips in PS1s. He's like, here's his number. Go get your thing fixed. So I was like, okay. So for like $20-$30, some guy modded my PS1. I went back, immediately got those games. And I was like,
yeah, because he's like, hey, I'm going to make more money out of this. So it's
yeah.
even better. Good deal for him.
Yeah.
Because what I, and like God, again, like I'm a few years older than you. What we had was the Famicom would release, but the Super Fire series, which would be, for a wrestling nerd, it's insane games. And I think a couple of them made into like American style games, where more or less it's a blatant ripoff of every single major wrestler in Japan. And then they try to do it with Americans and some luchadors. And back then, I think you had to like do something with the machine, with the Nintendo, like shave the side of their sign to make the games fit in there. It was really bizarre, but like the Super Fire games were popular amongst all of us too, back in the mid 90s. But again, you're trying to just figure out anything back then because, luckily between like, American Wild Child Ron and another friend of mine, they would videotape lucha shows, WF, and they would be trained into tape dealers so we can get more Japanese footage, And that was our way of networking back then, just so we can just learn and study more stuff because news alert, it felt like we really trained ourselves that hard, which that might be a good story to tell you in a couple minutes when you're ready. So I don't know what. So you want to know like how I really got involved in wrestling?
Yeah, like so now you're refereeing,
Yes.
Obviously everyone around you is super getting into wrestling. What made you decide, or maybe this is a wrestler peer pressure situation where finally everyone's.
That's exactly what it was.
Okay, there we go.
So this would have been 1997. Dragon is 17 at this point. And now picture this. Yeah, so he was born in 80. Like the funny thing is him and Scott Lost were born the exact same day in 1980. Yeah, and I'm like, okay. And he started training at WPW in Anaheim. It's like a lucha group. And so he had the lucha background. But I think he wanted to do more than just lucha, but that was his first way in, and I think he was like Ninja Dragon, and then he became Super Dragon eventually because his first actually was Ninja Dragon with the costume and the whole thing. There were people in the crowd chanting Nina instead of Ninja, and then Nina's girl. So it's like, I can't do this. So then he ended up with Super Dragon, which people made fun of his name obviously for years. Like, yeah, but you know what? It was better than Ninja Dragon.
Yeah.
Ninja, if they could have said Ninja, it might have worked, but again, it wasn't like he was doing so much martial arts. He more or less like punching you in the face and stuff like that. Not that I would know anything about that.
Yeah.
But anyway, at that point, like the first show I was involved in is because it's just so weird. Is if anybody remember when Worlds Collide is the AAA pay-per-view in November of '94, this has been like the famous one with Santo and Octagon match for hair against Art Bar and Eddie Guerrero. Well, if you've never seen it, look, and you have WWE Network, let that show up because that was an amazing match. And the next day, we decided to run our own indie show because we wanted to wrestle. And back in the 1990s, independent wrestling was like, it barely existed.
Yeah.
There was like one show I went to that had like Sabu versus Al Snow and a few local guys, and that was about it.
Yeah, it was either like flash in the pan, maybe they lasted a couple months, little organizations, or it was territory companies gripping to the edge of that coffin, like, don't bury us yet, please.
Yeah. Like Lucha was the big one. Like Lucha, there'd be Lucha shows running once a week for years, no problem. They would draw pretty good crowds. I mean, it's a different style of wrestling, but still it's independent wrestling, I guess, for lack of a better term, because it's just a guy trying to make money and get by. Every single week you would go and there'd be a different guy from Mexico. Like, oh, I remember bringing you up from the border, and like they're in town for a weekend. Like, hey, come work here Friday night in front of like 300 people.
Yeah, and until WCW and ECW started poaching all the luchadors, really they weren't getting work. They definitely weren't getting work in WWF at the time. That wasn't going to happen. Before that all started happening, luchadors were pretty much the guys who needed to work. Yeah, exactly. And all of these, like literally guys who working in TJ over the weekends, like, hey, I can get you extra booking in LA, and they'll just bring them up. I don't know how they got them across, but they got them across, brought them in, did a show, then they come on extra bucks, come back to TJ, do their show, and then they go back to wherever they live in Mexico, whether it's Tijuana or Mexico City, and that was a good extra few bucks to pay. And that's, I don't know if it's really going, now obviously now it's not going on, but that was going on for years where
I got to work one lucha show on a Friday, one on a Saturday, and then everyone would split the cost of getting the guy up there because it would be a draw as long as it's the person who has value. And so what we did was we couldn't get like Eddie or like Love Machine or those guys because they had contracts. But on that show, Stone Cold Scorpio and Chris Benoit. So we had them. They actually made an event at our first show at this little place in Fullerton, California. Like I think it drew 150 people, but it was more or less the first time. You know, it was like Blitzkrieg's first match, Mr. Excitement's first match. You know, more or less it's like, okay, we wrestled our trampoline and a couple of us involved had done a little bit in the ring, but not enough to really qualify. We were much like RevPro, was kind of DIY later. Yeah. But the fact is, it makes us look legitimate that we literally brought these guys in. And Al Snow was supposed to do a dark match on the show, is like a ninja gimmick he had. So he's like, hey, see you next day, we'll get you a payday. And he's like, okay, cool, you know. And I refereed that show, and that more or less got me at least a little bit out there and just took whatever I could. And our friends took, Blitzkrieg, Excitement, ABC, we took what we could, but hardly anybody wanted to touch us, because compare, we're doing some Japanese stuff or some lucha stuff. Now compare that to like WWF style in 1990s, okay? Like people are probably terrified of us. Yeah. They want nothing to do with us because we're doing crazy stuff back then. You know what I mean? So, we just took what we could. And luckily we had, people were digging Blitzkrieg because obviously you see Blitzkrieg, he was just a natural. What I would joke about is if Dragon had the drive and Blitzkrieg had like the natural ability, if we were able to mesh those two together, it would have been even better. And the first kind of break we had was, and I'm saying we, even though I wasn't wrestling yet, was APW, Gym Wars. Somehow Ron got in with them. Ron already got in with Conan from like filming shows in Tijuana and all that. And we were just itching and scratching it wherever we could. And I was like, I'm just refereeing helping my friends. And I'm like, all right, cool. So they're going to do a show. It's going to be like Blitzkrieg, Dragon, Ron, AWC, and I believe Hellblazer. Yeah. And so the extra deal to get us on Gym Wars, and remember, this is Gym Wars, 1997, mind you, was they wanted, he's like, they're going to bring in 2 Mexican minis. And if you know where the minis are, it'd be like a mini version of the regular full-size guy's gimmick, which I think it was in WWF for a minute. There was like a mini Vader, mini Mankind, which lots of fun because those guys were some really talented guys, And so what happened was it was going to be Ultimo Dragon Cito, so the mini version of Ultimo Dragon, versus Pequeño Piroff, which is, Piroff was a famous starbound there. And they realized the day before that Piroff's visa had expired. And they're like, and AWC's like, shoot, what do we do? Do we know anybody who's short enough to do this? And they're like, well, maybe Kevin can. Oh, Kevin can do it. Kevin can do it. And mind you, the only training I had was literally wrestling on the trampoline, mostly a Dragon, just messed around having fun, and just watching wrestling my whole life to where, as I said, 7 years old. I'm like, okay, I have a knowledge, but, can I actually, I'm like, oh God, no, I don't want to do this. And literally they called me, and I think it took them about an hour and a half for me to finally just say, okay, fine, I'll do it. If you can't get Piroff from across the border, I'll do it. Fine. Literally the next day I'm at work. I was at Home Depot, which this is the weird part, which I'm lucky I'm starting to get in trouble. My dad worked at the same Home Depot as me. So you think something would happen with this. I got a call saying, hey, your mom's sick, you need to go home. And I'm like, wouldn't you think they'd be asking my dad about this? That was like code for, hey, you got to go. And I'm just like, oh God, I really don't want to do this. It's like 10 o'clock in the morning, and we're in Orange County. We got to drive all the way to Hayward. That's a good 6-hour drive.
Yep.
And I'm like hyperventilating practically the whole way up. So I'm like, you're telling me my very first match is going to be versus a guy who wrestles in arena in Mexico, who's a star in Mexico. I'm like, oh my gosh. And even I was like questioning, like, can't you have Blitzkrieg do it? I gotta be talking to Blitzkrieg. And he's like, no. And I remember I made sure during that night that we stood back to back, and I had a half-inch taller on him, like, he could have done this, And so more or less I get up there and I'm wrestling Ultimate Dragon Cito my first match, and God, it was terrifying. I mean, it's terrifying. It's scary enough doing your first match, and you're doing it where it felt like it was a video game. I'm wearing the costume, I'm in the ring, he doesn't speak English, I don't speak Spanish. Luckily, the referee spoke both in case something happened.
Okay.
So we put together the most basic 7-minute match. And Disco told me, and I've never seen it. I'd love to see a tape of it. But for first match, I guess it was okay. So I'm like, at least I didn't completely, like, crap out. Because some people have had horrible first matches.
Yeah.
At least I had someone good with me. You know what I mean? But imagine your first match being at ABW Gym Wars. If you're a fan of, like, that era in the 90s, it was like the West Coast ECW.
Yeah, we just talked to Michael Modest a few weeks ago. We were talking about Gym Wars, and he was talking about like Vic Grimes and like flaming tables and all kinds of stuff. And yeah, Gym Wars was a crazy place at times. That's for sure.
Yeah, because that's when Modest was there, and Aaron O'Grady, and Vic Grimes, and all those guys. And I'm just like, what am I doing here? And that was kind of the joke too. In the end, it's like I got actually paid a little bit more money than all the other guys who came up for the match. I'm like, I never won you. Like I was like my fun, but laughing. But the whole time, someone needed to like sit me down and slap me across the face, just like calm me down, because I was pacing the hallways, and everyone there knew it was my first match, and someone should have told me, just shut the F up, just keep it away from everybody else, just to not make them all look bad,
It's like a Mad Libs of.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's your first match. Where's it going to be? In Hayward, okay, for APW Gym Wars, and you're going to be wrestling Ultimo Dragoncito. You're like,
and I've seen this guy, and he's great. I'm like, oh God, what? Why? Yeah,
especially in America, there's a lot of independent promotions that when they get the minis, it's played for a lot of laughs. But if you watch Lucha Minis, it's a totally different story.
Yeah.
They're great.
That's where the pressure was, because like, oh gosh, they're not bringing these guys up here for fun. This is gonna be he wants a real actual match. And at least like a few years later, I actually did come back to do one more time at ABW in 2002, I want to say. And Wolfgang said to me, he's like, yeah, you did great today. I never thought I'd want to bring you back. But yeah, I don't blame you. Because those I wrestled Dragon up there. I was like, okay. I'm like, that was like redemption. I'm like, okay, good. At least got to make up for that.
Did you have a lot of interaction with Roland at all your first time there?
Not that I can recall. Yeah, I was, like I said, I was pacing. I don't think he didn't look too thrilled over the whole situation, because, and honestly, I'm 5'7". I'm 5'7". It's not like I'm a mini. I'm really not.
Yeah.
And the mini limit in Mexico is 5 foot, and I think Ultimo Dragoncito's right there, right at 5 foot. And so I was like, this is gonna look kind of tacky. And you know what the funny part is? That wasn't the only time I wrestled as a mini.
Really?
Yeah, believe it or not. I think mini. I'm gonna use that. I can say midget, but I might get in trouble for saying that. But
that's
the matches like that.
They still advertise the word midget in wrestling, like posters and stuff, but I've never been comfortable with it. I don't know. I don't know how much better mini is, but I definitely don't want to say midget.
I always just think of it because it's lucha, like, oh, those mini super estrellas, and it sounds so great like that. You know what I mean? But gosh, because now I'm going to story. So Raw and AWC had this guy in Vegas, this kid who, my God, I think he was like 16 at the time. This is 1999. There was a promoter out of San Diego who was going to run a show in Arizona, and he wanted to get, minis. And I'm sure he didn't use that term. And he had this guy who was 4'3", weighed 160 pounds. I'm 5'7", weighed 135 pounds. And I think he was like 16 years old. And his gimmick was the Little Show, which I'm like, and I still just laugh. I love just saying that name to see people's reaction. I'm like, oh, that's perfect. It's perfect.
Yeah.
And mind you, and we go out there, and I told you, 4'3", 160. Now picture that frame, it's.
Yeah.
And I have to act like he's all faster than me and all this stuff. I'm like, how am I going to pull this off? And I'm just thinking in my head, okay, I'm going to try and be like Siko's back in the day, just fly around for him, just do all this. And we do this match in Arizona. And literally after the match, this tells still how naive I was. Moore comes up to me later talking to me like, oh, blah, 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 how many matches you had? It was literally like my sixth match at the most, I think, at that point. And I honestly told him that. And my friend, and Ron's like, what are you doing? And because of all that, he didn't want to pay me.
Yep. You're paying your dues, brother.
Here's the funny part. Here's the funny part about that. the Little Show, it was his first match that night. And he went up to Little Show, this same promoter, and said, "Oh man, I like your work." And I'm laughing, going, "I did such a good job carrying this guy, making him look all right, that I almost didn't get paid because Ron fought to make sure I got something." And this guy was getting praised for his work. I'm like, there you go. That's how you carry somebody, I guess, for someone as experienced as I was.
It sounds like the promoter didn't really have an eye for wrestling.
No. He was a promoter who was out of San Diego, and I wrestled for him later, and wasn't very good either. But what's funny is the very first Revolution Pro show, the main event was actually Ultra Jr. versus the Little Show. So, you think RevPro, like, oh yeah, Dragon, me, Rising Sun, Excalibur. No, the very first main event was a minis match.
Wrestling has a weird way of circling back to where you don't even think about it, but like all of a sudden you're like, wait, how did I end up back seeing these same people, the same stuff going on? It's very weird. But
you know what, too, that first show, it was at our dojo in Anaheim, because that little show, he had a bunch of fans and family. We packed out the place. Not a lot of people. It was like around 100 or so, but he packed it out that night. Like, all right, well, I guess we made the right decision. Had the draw on the top. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And hopefully some of the people come back, and they most likely didn't, but we'll take a little bit of help paying the rent.
So when you're, obviously you mentioned that the Revolution Pro guys, like you said, a lot of people didn't want to touch you guys. They were like, oh, what style is this that they're doing right now? When did you start noticing the shift on the indies to more of that style? Because I feel like that style, and even now today, you can notice it when you watch AEW or WWE. Now that style is the style. Mixing Japanese lucha plus basically like mixing everything together and throwing it all in there. So when did you start noticing on the independent scene that shift that everyone started kind of going that way?
I mean, you gotta realize I'm about the West Coast bias guys out here, but it probably was around the time Gorilla started that you can really more start to see it, because ROH's been around for like a year or so. Because RevPro started in '99, and whoever could see the stuff, could get out there, because you always hear about the West Coast bias, and apparently that's real, because people were able to get our tapes for a long time. It took Dragon I think Dragon's first time out on the East Coast around 2002 for CZW, and that helped get him out there. It probably helped expose our style as well, because he was the first real guy to make waves from our circle and our style to get out there. And he was really over there from everything I had seen. And that kept going because he met Generico over there and Steen over there. And it was more or less just everyone started melding everything together. And that's might be just tape trading too, going further and further and further. Everyone's seeing more footage, where nowadays, obviously you can see whatever you want, whenever you want.
Yeah.
So it's not as much of an effort. That started to change really more in the last 5 to 10 years, once like YouTube or just able to just like download videos started to really come about. But yeah, to answer your question, I would say like 304 probably.
Okay.
Because it's going to take a little bit of time, because sure, you'll hear about match, but how soon are you going to see it too? You got the right person who has the right tape.
No, I remember in high school, like I going on RF Video and ordering. I remember I got to see the CZW Best of the Best tournament.
Yeah.
And it was like. And I remember watching it and it blowing my fucking mind. I was just like, this is the craziest.
What year would that have been? Because I know Dragon started there. I think that was 02 was the first year.
I don't remember Dragon was on that, because I think it was before 02. Because it was all I remember now off the top of my head is like Ruckus, Trent Acid, Johnny Cashmere.
Oh yeah.
Trent Acid.
That sounds like 2001 time. Because I remember we started Epic, when Epic started in like 2001-ish. We used Trent Acid and Ruckus a little bit. And you could see some of that there too. You could see they were incorporating some of the different styles as well.
Yeah. Trent Acid was a dude that I was like, this guy's going to be huge. It's a bummer story. Not the only one in wrestling, but
no, absolutely not.
It's one of the ones that sticks out in my head for sure. So now we're going RevPro, PWG starts up. What is that like, as a person who's obviously friends with people in both camps, and there was a lot of crossover, obviously. But, what is that like, if you're not one of the, the six and you're not starting it, but, you don't want to be a dick to everyone, you know what I mean? Like, so how do you balance the idea of like working for different promotions when different people, are running it?
I know, because I know there had to be, not me in particular, because we go at my own story. Well, separately from all this, because I more or less finished up a few months into Gorilla, but I know there had to be some guys who were angry because RevPro really started to change around 2002 or so, in that the way we were trying to do it is drag would help with the junior kind of stuff, because anybody saw RevPro, we more or less would kind of split the heavyweight side. That'd be like the Lucha Libre title, and then you have the junior stuff, because we didn't incorporate the junior belt till I believe 01 maybe ish. Whenever, and we did our own tournament, we did the Revolution J. So we had a couple different distinct styles going on, and we tried to keep it separate as much as possible. And there had to probably be some heat, I'm sure, because some of these guys are like, wait a minute, I'm not getting as much exposure because I'm this part of the card. I'm not wrestling Dragon and Excalibur, me, or whoever. And then that carried over to Gorilla, I'm sure. I'm sure that'd be some people, without naming names, I could think of a couple people I'm sure who could not have been happy with the fact that, well, hey, I work at Pro with you guys. Why can't I work in Gorilla?
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the further divide happened a little bit, I would say, because did you ever hear of RevX? Are you aware of RevX?
RevX. Why does that sound so familiar?
Yeah. See, so there was a spin-off kind of RevPro that started in around 2002 or so. RevPro was more or less running shows at Frank & Sons, in the industry. And then I want to say it was XPW, I think, was all more or less done at that point. And yeah, we'll have to get back to XPW at some point. But through Ron making connections, I think it was through like Chaos and a couple of the other dudes, he started RevX, which would run at a theater in like Southgate, which is like a suburb of LA. And it would say RevPro, but it was like a different style, and that was a little bit more Americanized and more hardcore kind of stuff. And it was weird for us because the stuff that I would do or Dragon would do, it was a different audience, so it wasn't really getting over to the same way. And that was a little frustrating for us too. You know what I mean? Because we're like, this is what we like to do.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, you would have like AWC, Angel, and they're doing more mixed hardcore and American stuff, and that's what's getting over that audience. And we're like, nah, okay. And I wouldn't be surprised if that a little bit maybe led to a little bit more of the PWG thing happening. Because I think, are you aware of MPW, Millennium Pro?
Millennium Pro. That sounds familiar too, but I don't remember it.
That was a group that ran out of the Valley, and I think Top Gun mentioned Loki versus Dragon.
Mm-hmm.
They did that show, and they would bring in a couple that was like the first time they bring an East Coast indie guy to wrestle a West Coast indie guy. And I think they kind of had the ideas, oh hey, what if we do it like this, where we bring in someone, an East Coast person, blah 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 blah. And we did a little bit. We brought in Mike Quackenbush, I think, for our second Rev J in 02, and just try to put a little money aside to bring in somebody to make us more exposure on the East Coast. At the same time, we're seeing like, oh, it'd be kind of cool to do like kind of like an all-star kind of show.
Yeah.
And that's kind of, I mean, especially now, as years progress, that's what PWG kind of became. It was more like, hey, let's make it to where it's a mix of us versus these East Coast guys. And that's what ROH kind of was too in the beginning. You almost say like an all-star indie show.
Yeah, I think a lot of that, there was a few people who started having that idea in the early 2000s. There was APW with King of Indies.
Of course.
And a few of those where it was kind of like, okay, let's like put together these things. And a lot of them were like one-offs, like King of Indies, where it was like, okay, we're going to do a tournament and, that kind of thing. But then like, fly-ins, if people don't understand now, especially if they're younger, the indie scene, fly-ins is a regular thing nowadays.
Yeah, no, it definitely wasn't then. Absolutely
yeah.
Not. Like, I could probably count the number of fly-ins I had off the top of my head, probably. Yeah. I'm like, like 4 or 5. If that, no, 1, 2, 3. Oh, God, I can only get 4 fly-ins. Jeez, listen to that. For a guy who wrestled from like 99 to 97 technically to 2003 on the regular.
Yeah. And nowadays, don't get me wrong, all these people are extremely talented, and I'm not even going to name who I'm talking about, but there's a lot of people that do fly-ins for shows, and I'm looking at it like, yeah, I get that they're like indie darlings, but the average person doesn't know who the hell these people are. Yeah. It's crazy. It seems insane to me, some of the people that get flown in for shows, that I'm like, really? Like, did you really, like, does the draw really pay for their ticket? I don't know. Like,
I doubt it. And that's part of where ROH first started. I would hear like they saw what King of Indies did. And they're like, well, if we do this, they were owned by RF Video, and RF Video is selling videos of shows. So it's like, okay, well, that makes sense. If you've got this and you can sell enough tapes to make it worth your while, great.
Yeah.
And that's what PWG kind of was at the beginning. It's like, okay, well, let's try to supplement everything by doing that,
Yeah, I think the selling of merch/video is really like where like ROH, and especially in the beginning, I'm like, there's no way ROH is making money off just tickets. That's impossible,
Right. I mean, you can definitely say the same for Gorilla for a few years in there,
Yeah, there you go. Well, yeah, there you go. I guess that's all businesses though, right? I mean,
yeah. But, it helped out. They got like their DVDs, and I think it was like High Spots was helping them distribute, and it's like they work together to make it work off for both of them,
So let's go back to XPW because I always love hearing XPW stories. I know a few people who have wrestled in XPW pretty well. Luke Hawx is a pretty good friend of mine.
Yeah.
So I've always loved hearing XPW stuff. But so you said you actually I knew about the one match. You said you wrestled in a way earlier show as well.
I believe it was their second ever show. This would have been August of '99, and the match was myself and Mr. I was still Ultra Jr. then. I mean, that means we'll figure out I can tell the whole Taro thing later, whatever. But it was Ultra Jr. and Mr. Excitement versus American Wild Child and Yakuza. He later wrestled in RevPro under the Dark Side as well. And it was one of those things where I don't know how Ron made the connection, but he got us this match. And this is still the times where we haven't even, it's right on the time we had the dojo. And we didn't have any students, which I'll get in the dojo in a minute when I'm done telling all this.
Okay.
So we got booked on the show, and it's like, okay, this is cool. It's good exposure for us. And it's like, all right, we were told, okay, cool, you guys going to be on, I think we were on first second, like, oh, you're going to have 12 minutes, do whatever you're going to do. Like, okay, cool. And we go out there, and literally about 2 minutes in, they tell us to go home. And we were just pissed. So I come, and Excitement goes out first. He's getting jumped, and I come out. And you remember my old outfit, I mean, the old outfit, you see this. This is my old mask. I found how I got this one. So you have this old thing, and so the whole crowd back in those days, especially, anyone comes out in some goofy full costume, they just can't Power Ranger the guy. And I was like, oh God. And I'm running out there and I'm doing my thing, and I'm like, you mother, you're calling me Power Ranger. I'm like, God, this is what I really don't want to deal with. And I do a couple of good spots, and then it's like, I got to do one dive, and they're like, oh, everyone goes crazy. Holy shit. I'm like, okay, good. We're good. And all of a sudden they tell us to go home. We're like, oh, we were just mad. And we literally just go to the finish. We went like 4 minutes or so. We had all this stuff we're going to do. And we go backstage, and I remember, I don't think I was the only one, but I was openly pissed off about being cut off like that. And I think we really got some bad looks back there, for complaining openly about having our match cut like 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And that was a weird show too, because it was like Major Guns was back there, I think. Like Big Dick Dudley, Missy Hyatt,
Major
Amy
Guns.
It was just such a weird hodgepodge of people. And then Ron has his camera, and he's filming stuff backstage. And oh God, he probably has it still on tape somewhere. And I'm standing next to Missy Hyatt, and he's talking to Missy, and he has Missy hit me at the Singapore cane, and I'm just like, oh, and then she starts screaming, Sal, and I go down, and I'm selling, and she goes, now lick my shoe, and I'm like, oh God, and I end up licking her heel, and Ron has it on video. I'm like, oh my God, what is happening to me here? And then literally about a minute later, Big Dick Dudley comes up to Ron, like cussing him out for having the gall to film people backstage, to where he made him give up the videotape. And then, of course, Ron kayfabed and give him a different tape.
Of course, there you go.
Like, beautiful. Except he has that tape by somewhere of me licking Missy Hyatt's high heel.
So what was... So, you have a unique perspective, and that you were there very early and then much later in XPW. Yeah. So what was the difference between the first time you were there and the second time you were there, as far as like the vibe? Like what did it seem like, backstage, any of that stuff?
It seemed a little more party-like. Everyone's just, hey, this is cool. Probably because it was new, and it was just like, oh my God. Some of these guys, it was like, this is the real first chance of like chaos that some of these younger dudes in LA had gotten, because we got this connection through Kevin Kleinrock. I forgot that Kevin was trying to break in. He was doing a little federation and AWC and Dragon did a match for him the year before, and I'm like, that must have been our connection, how we got in there. And that must have always kept us on the back of their minds, because the time when I wrestled there again was seriously like a year and a half later. It would have been like 2001 or so, and so there it was. I think it's like my second favorite match of my career. Probably. It may not be my second best, but definitely the second most memorable, because, it was like, oh, it's so hype. It's the match probably, if anybody's seen a match of mine, it's probably that one, because it was me and Rising Sun against Dragon and Excalibur. And part of the fun, I can always make fun of Dragon because it's that blue gear in that match, which he hated that blue gear. Oh my gosh, he hated that blue gear. And it's like, I just laugh because like just one of his only television matches, he's wearing that blue gear that he hated so much. And the fact for me, going back to where I said at the very beginning, this is the Olympic Auditorium, which I'm just like, my God, I was going here when I was a kid, and I was just like, this is amazing for me. And like I said, my dad went there in the 60s going to shows, and I went there in the 90s later as a teenager to see like lucha shows, and I'm just like, this is really happening.
Yeah.
I can't believe this. And we went out there, and you saw the match. I'm sure you've seen it. Maybe you've seen it. People loved the match, and so then the weird part was, of course, because you got the atmosphere. It seemed to be a more laid back atmosphere at that point, and so we're doing all our stuff. And I don't know how recently you saw the match, but towards the end, Rising Sun had trouble doing springboards in that match for whatever reason. I think those 2 times he had an issue with a springboard, and I think the second time he kind of like fell on his head. And Dragon, when Dragon gets mad, you better watch out, and do whatever, and led to the finish of the match. And we're going backstage. I'm carrying him over the shoulder. We're selling, and we go past the curtain, and everyone who's watching is just standing up applauding for us. And it's like, but Jimmy, meanwhile, I'm sorry, Rising Sun Jimmy, I can say it. He was livid because he messed with these springboards. Like everyone's applauding, going like, oh my God, what you guys did is so good. And I let him go, and he's walking. He is so pissed off. He kicked the trash can over and knocked it over while everyone's applauding. It's like the old record scratches at a party. Like, shoot. And I'm like, oh no, we're gonna get so much heat. I'm saying back in my head, but I just like, oh no, like this just kind of kills it. And we go back there. We go for the backstage, and it was Steve Rosado got to. I'll say it. I was like, Steve Rosado of APW comes up to us. And he said, well, I'm sure probably a couple other dudes had to be feeling, because remember, we're the opening match. He comes up to us like saying, well, thanks, guys. What the hell are we supposed to do now? And we're just like, well, sorry, we're doing what we're told, because what we were told to do was go out there and do your shit. It's like, all right, we're going to do our match, because that's exactly what Rob and Kevin wanted. So we're not going to hold back. If that's what you want us to do, we're going to go for it. And obviously, the match got over.
Yeah. There was it's always funny to me when guys are basically like, no, you guys have to be worse than you are because I don't want to do too much in my match. Basically, it's kind of, it's pretty standard, but it's kind of annoying at the same time, because at the same time,
there's a different standard in 2001 too. What I mean? It's still a different standard.
Yeah.
But you do what the brewer tells you.
Yeah, but especially when you're working the. I know this was XPW, and at the time, I guess you could say it's a higher tier of indie.
Yeah.
But even so, you're all the independent contractor fucking thing. You're all trying to get over. You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, and granted, I mean, I was never looking to make a living in wrestling. I was like, there's no way. Come on. I was like 5'7", 135 pounds. I know I'm not gonna make it as a wrestler. That's why I figured if I'm going to go into wrestling, I'll be referee. I'm the perfect size for a ref, and then, I ended up going on this detour that I mentioned earlier. And I'm like, I'm just going to go along with it and have fun while I can. And when it's not fun, I'm like, yeah, I'm good.
Yeah.
I made some money, but I made a little bit of money, but it wasn't through wrestling directly, which, hell, I'm not so go into it. Are you aware of what the Nikki show? Do you even know what that is?
No.
So here, I'll tell you how I made money. American Watchout made money. Here's how RevPro almost financed itself. So I'm going to go back to 99. we got the dojo, and more or less we trained wherever we could. We would do shows here and there, but I would help sell videotapes on eBay. This your 1999 time capsule. We always would have a handful of tapes we'd sell on eBay on an auction weekly, and just try to like sell to whoever bids on it. Like, all right, here, oh, you pay 9, you want bid 9 here, you want to still buy it for 9 here. We were just trying to make money that way selling videotapes because it's 1999. We just burn whatever compilation we would have. And it's just like, okay, well, hopefully it helps pay the rent, in addition to running our school. And, because I will say that, I said Dragon got trained, American Wild Child got trained in Lucha in Tijuana at the Auditorium. That was run by Rey Mysterio Sr. Just to give credibility to his background, because with the RevPro dojo obviously had some great guys who actually came out of it. And
I guess if people aren't familiar, they might hear what we've been saying and they'd be like, "Wait, were these guys all just backyarders?" It's like, well, no, there was.
I started there. I mean, a bunch of us started there, but we got credibility later. Obviously, because because the first time I met Sky was Scorpio Sky, and Quicksilver was. We actually had a guy who was going backyard wrestling. They actually rented our dojo to use our ring and do a real show. And they were talking about, oh, our best guy is this kid. I hope he's not getting mad. We're talking about Scorpio Sky Andrews. I'm like, okay. Like, oh, yeah, this is the guy right here. He's going to be good. And Sky had to be like 16 years old at that, at that point. I'm just like, watch this guy. I'm like, oh my gosh, who is this guy? And then obviously through doing that, connecting, they started coming and training with all of us at the dojo, and eventually, obviously, luckily, I mean, you had Sky, you had Quicksilver, Bosch came through us, and they're on like the Bucks did some training with us, so they were starting to get into things, and so somehow our dojo, which started with, oh God, here I'll throw myself under the bus a little bit here. I mentioned that WW school in Anaheim earlier. We actually used to sneak in to where they train once a week. It's 20 years later. I can get away with this now. We would know when they would train, and they would finish around 8:00. So we would all go together Wednesdays at 8:30. It'd be like Wild Child, myself, Blitzkrieg Dragon, Disco, a couple others. And we found a spot where we could sneak through the fence and just go. We would just roll around the ring and do things for a couple months. And one night when we were messing around, a rope broke. And we're like, oh, now what? And we didn't know what to do. And you know what the stupidest, how brilliant we were? We came back the next Wednesday. So of course they knew they knew to check on that Wednesday. And Martin's looking, the promoter Martin's looking like, really, it's you guys? And we're like trying to pass. Oh, we would never disrespect the ring, and we're always trying to pass it off like someone cut the rope, and we're like, no, we're all just like, oh my God, we're gonna get arrested for this, And I think more or less we had to do a few matches. Some of us had to do a few matches for Martin as penance for that.
That's not the worst.
That's definitely paying penance, is working for free for a lucha promotion, in in the LA area.
Yeah.
But that's where I got my training. Was in that situation initially, and then obviously do what little I did in RevPro once we had our
So what about, on a lot of these episodes, I like to talk about the weird backstage, idiosyncrasies of wrestling, the handshake. What the podcast is called Indy Handshake, because, you gotta give them one of these. You gotta give them one of these little guys right here. So when you guys are, kind of training a little punk rock, a little do-it-yourself, was there some clashes as far as that stuff?
Oh my gosh, yeah. Because we literally, when we were first going to shows, I think it'd be like, we're all just like, why the fuck are they not shaking our hands? This is like 97, 98, and we're just like, and meanwhile, they're thinking we're assholes, and we're thinking they're assholes. You know what I mean? And I'm just like, we didn't know the culture. We did not know the culture, because the few of us who were legitimately trained were trained in lucha. So it's a completely different world, because I don't, like I said, I speak lucha, but that's not enough Spanish to actually like, hey, Dragon obviously doesn't speak Spanish. Wild Child spoke some, but not fluent enough to maybe get by, but still in the American atmosphere, oh God, flaming heat, I'm sure, because they're looking at us, and they're probably looking at, obviously we're snug, which we kind of were, we trust each other, we hit each other hard. You watch any of our stuff, and we lay it in some. We're not looking to hurt each other, but we lay it in. But oh yeah. Yeah. Oh, especially back in that period. We didn't know any better. That's all it came down to.
And would you say that familiarity and snugness, especially with Super Dragon, if anyone's watching this or listening to this and hasn't watched a Taro Super Dragon match, first of all, I don't know how you stumbled upon an indie wrestling podcast without seeing a match of that sort, but hey, I digress. Yeah, what was it? I mean, Super Dragon, it's no secret. Everyone's it's kind of a joke about, he could be stiff at times. Sort of. But, it seems it was a little more with you. Do you think it's because you're cousins? Is that what it is?
Oh, yeah, probably. But you know what? I mean, if you look later, I would watch like Quicksilver and Generico, and I'd be like, oh gosh, that would have been me if I kept going. You know what I mean? But it was that family trust because, like I said earlier, he literally grew up across the street from me. I was like 5 years older than him, so I mean we're cousins, but we kind of had like a brother relationship, and it's funny because it went two ways. Because there's times where I was gonna have matches watching over me going, "Be careful," and I was just laughing going, "You're telling me to be careful," But I always knew it's like, you know what, he's gonna be stiff with me, but I know he's not looking to hurt me. You know what I mean? Because I make him look great, obviously.
Yeah.
And and then in return, he makes me look great because I never thought it was that great. I was as good as my opponent, I thought, for the most part. Like, I'll give you like a great example. He's like, "Hey, Kevin, I got this idea for a move," and we're on the trampoline. He's like, "So here, get on my shoulders." So I'm about to tell you, right? It's like, okay, if I have you like on the torture rack, and I lift you up like this, and I just drop you down like that, and pile driver, and obviously psycho driver,
Yeah.
And I'm just like, okay, we might be able to make it work. And we practiced on the trampoline a few times, like, okay, I think we're safe, the way we're doing it. I'm like, all right, I feel okay. And then really the first time we actually did it in a match was, it was the first match really got RevPro exposure in like the July 2000 match, which now I think is finally on YouTube again. Someone finally put it up there. And that was like what got us first recognized whatever small internet media there was back in like the 2000s. That was the first tape bars that really made some traction of RevPro. So, and that's the first time he did it. I'm like, okay. And I'm like, took it. I'm like, okay, I'm good. All right. And then later you saw, but look, like I said, I'm real thin. And the joke was, as small as they said I am, I'm even lighter when I go up for moves. You know what I mean? I'm about 35 and I'm like, all right. And I go up so light too.
Yeah.
We would make fun of Rising Sun because he was like similar to my size, but he would be like dead weight going up. Like he never would go up for anything. I'm like, oh my God, why are you weighing twice as much as you do?
Yeah, RevPro. It's hard to look up RevPro stuff for a couple reasons. One, there's Pro Wrestling Revolution ran by Gabe up here in Northern California. And two, because Revolution Pro in UK also calls himself RevPro. And it's
the fact he calls himself RevPro, I was like, why did they do that? That's really about to be hard. But there was a guy at Rob Viper has been, I think that's his name on YouTube, but I know him because I met him at Gorilla. He started to put up some of the stuff from like 2000. And that's another problem is it's all VHS.
Yeah.
All of it's VHS. So it's like, you got to go to the problem of digitizing it and all that. And, I even talked to Ron, AWC, about like, hey, can we put some of this stuff up there? Are you going to care? Not that there's money to be made. It's just like, I tell people, oh, you used to be a wrestler. And I literally find like 2 matches of mine on YouTube. And I'm like, oh, that's kind of a bummer. You know? But now at least there's a couple of matches out there. And I'm like, oh, do I really want to watch this? And I'm like, for 2000 Indy, it held up way better than I thought it would. Considering how experienced I was. And I'm like, oh, good. Thank goodness.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the thing about the indies is, you always think something's not very good.
Oh, yeah.
Until you watch another indie show and you go, oh, never mind. Because sometimes, the gamut of quality on an indie show really ranges from like some of the greatest stuff you'll ever see in your life to like the absolute drizzling of shits. And it's...
You know what, though? That was the worst thing to watch, the Bad Lucha match. Like, if you go to indie lucha shows, Bad Lucha is almost like the worst wrestling you can imagine because that Bad Lucha is like 2 out of 3 falls, 30 minutes, and you're just like, oh my gosh, just put a bullet in my head. Just do it now. And a funny Indiocracy I saw of guys were like, the guys who would be like, oh my God, my match was great, blah, 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 blah. It's like, they're usually the guys who are amongst like the guys who I'm like, no. And I'm going to be nice like, I'm like, no. And the guy's like, oh my God, my match was bad, blah, blah, blah. And they're nitpicking themselves to death. Those usually need the guys who are amongst the better dudes I found technically and work-wise in my experience in wrestling. Like, that's kind of funny how it is, you know?
Yeah, it's for a while, me and the other host who does the Lucha episodes for this, Jesus Cruz, we were both doing stand-up at the same time, doing like open mics and stuff like that. He went on further than I did. I did it for a few months and I quit. But I always found the same thing at like an open mic, like, because you would be there in the beginning with like all the people who were at the open mic before like a crowd gets there. And it was always the dude who's the loudest, who's the most like flamboyantly like, hey, I'm the shit, man. Like, it was that guy who would go up there and just eat ass on stage every time. And I'm just like the first time I saw him, I met him and I was like, oh man, this guy must be great. And just,
you watch it, you're like, oh.
And I watch it like, what is happening right now?
Yeah, and I saw that plenty at indie shows. Like, oh my gosh, why do you think you're good? Why? I mean, not that I'm so great, but I have more of a clue than this guy. You know what I mean? You know, because I'm seeing what I'm doing wrong, you know, and trying to work on that as opposed to, you know, just focus on what I'm doing right. You know?
Yeah, I always say, like, you know, for me, wrestling has always been, and I've said this multiple times in this podcast, so I kind of feel like I'm repeating myself over and over again, but I always say wrestling is like a buffet. I like watching different things for each match. I like seeing a lot of different stuff. So for me, I just like when people try their best at a certain thing that they have a passion for doing. Yeah. Like, if you love lucha, do lucha. Mm-hmm. Like, sometimes you'll see like people like trying high spots and stuff like that, and you're like, I don't think you're the guy for this. Like, I don't, you know, and I think that's much worse. I don't know.
No, you're absolutely right. Because for myself, and this was where Dragon helped me too. It's like, okay, I know you're not good at this, so let's not do that. You know, you're gonna find certain things like, I am not gonna do this kind of thing because I just didn't do it well for whatever reason. Like, let's stick to what makes you look good, and we'll incorporate that in the match. It'll make the match better. It'll make the flow better, and it'll keep me over. And in fact, help keep him over, you know? Yeah.
Oh, man. Any other interesting XPW stuff when you were there? Or I keep going back to that, but XPW is just...
No, it's okay. I mean, because like I said, it was just that time. And then the time in Reseda, which I already mentioned the best part there, you know, the videotape. Because we did a house show the next day in San Bernardino Arena, which, God, that was a disaster. It was like 50 people there at that. And I was like, oh, so bad. And then that, and no, unfortunately, I wish I could have had more because I don't know what happened. I never got brought back. I was like, did I do something wrong? Yeah. And I even think Rising Sun came back for another match after that. I was like, but I was fine in this match. Yeah. And then Excalibur had the whole thing where he had to deal with being mixed with Kevin Kleinrock. I don't remember that whole nonsense. Oh, that was so bad, that storyline.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a weird time. XPW especially was a weird situation because it was like this weird, like, we want to be ECW but more extreme than ECW. Right.
But I will have to say, and to go back to that, I forgot a big thing really happened was that first time we wrestled in Reseda is they actually had two guys who were going to do almost a MMA like shoot style kind of fight match. And the group was called UFO. It was affiliate of Inoki, but this is where I'm going to tell everything to RevPro, and it actually had a huge impact on us later, was we met Paul T that night. If you know who Paul T is, he was actually the original commissioner of RevPro. Of PWG, sorry. Mm-hmm. But we met him, and we networked through him, and he was the guy who first started bringing, like, Japanese talent over to RevPro. So that was, like, a big accidental connection that we made that night. And obviously later PWG, because Paul would help book us. I'm sure he had to be the caveat for like the Dragon Gate guys originally coming into PWG back in 06, 07, I believe it was. And, you know, like that's a very, unspoken hero of Gorilla was Paul, because he really helped us make like all kinds of connections just through simply being the right guy in the right place and knowing the language. Because he would help bring over Nozawa. Like Nozawa was a regular guy we had in RevPro there. And now Kiku Taro. You know, his first matches in America were in RevPro.
Yeah, I was reminded again the other day of one of the greatest clips of all time, which is you, Kikutaro, and Talwar.
Unbelievable. 1, 2. Oh! Kikutaro, instead of breaking up the hole, breaking up the pinfall attempt on Colt Cabana.
What are you doing, Kiku? Huh? You just kicked Taro.
Yes, my name is Kikutaro.
He's saying Takataro just saying he just kicked Taro.
Yes,
and
you kicked Taro.
Kikutaro's saying, yes, I am Kikutaro.
Understand? You just kicked Taro.
Yes, my name is Kikutaro.
He says, yes, my name is Kikutaro. And Takataro says enough shenanigans as he throws him out of the ring.
I saw that get tweeted out. Like, I forgot how funny that was.
It was
like,
so funny.
You know, I literally had to lay on the mat and hide because that literally was, you know, when that guy was playing, it's just like, oh, I'm going to, you know, he comes up and kicks me, and all of a sudden I hear him, what are you doing? That's Taro. I was like, yes, I'm Kikutaro. And I don't know how John get the straight face. I'm laying on the mat, looking at the mascot. I'm just like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And I just had to sell it even longer. As I'm like, that's one of the few times I'm like laughing in the ring. I'm like, oh, this is fantastic.
See, I did not. Yeah, that was spur of the moment. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
I thought that was
completely spur of the moment. Yeah, I had some fun times because I never wrestled Kiku, but I tagged him in before he had the mask gimmick in RevPro a couple times, and I refereed, two of his matches in PWG. That one and a match in 04 when he was still Evason, and he brought over one of the Osaka Pro guys, Kushibo Kamen. He was like the clown gimmick.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. So let's go back a little bit.
Yes.
I want to, because I'm a big fan of indie gimmicks, especially when they're outlandish. We mentioned Kikutaro. So how is Ultra Taro? How is Taro? How is all this born? How does this happen?
Okay. So yeah, so that's I can make this go way back. I can tie this back to my very first Lucha show. I can tie it way back to this because it's just so small world. My very first indie show I went to in 1992 with the guy Roy mentioned earlier, and a guy we met through reading the Observer. We met him somewhere, and he was older than us. He drove us up. I'm like 17. He drove us up to LA for a random lucha show at this venue called Cal State LA. That venue's most known for, they had one of the weirdest matches. And I always like telling you about this match. It's on YouTube. It was, I hope I can remember everybody in this. It was Atsushi Onita, Io Del Santo, and oh gosh, I want to say Tarzan Goto. I might have the wrong third guy there, but it was against Negro Casas, Tim Patterson, and somebody else. And it was one of these matches on a handheld that Dave Meltzer gave 5 stars back in like 1992. It was like the most weird hybrid. We have Lucha, FMW, and it's just like a masterpiece. Because Santo and Negro were amazing back in that period. Justino Nito with his Japanese contingent. It's just a weird clusterfuck that comes together perfectly. But the reason why I'm mentioning that is I got to go there a few months later for an indie show, and actually on that show was Ultra Taro. And in that show, he actually blew his knee out doing a tope, which is terrible. Like, I saw him get carved out, I didn't even realize, like, oh my God, what happened to this dude? And funny sidebar is Mr. Excitement was actually at that show too before I knew him. So I keep bumping into Mr. Excitement at random wrestling shows before I met him. And so what happened was that guy ends up becoming another gimmick called Leon Negro, and later he became the second Psicosis in AAA.
Oh, okay.
When Psicosis went to WCW, I guess Payne AAA had the right. He thought he had the rights to Psicosis, and he made no Psicosis. So it's this guy. So the guy who had the Ultra Taro gimmick somehow sold to this guy we knew, and this guy wrestled those Ultra Taro. Yeah, Ultra Taro. He's wrestled Ultra Taro, doing shows around, and wasn't very good. I mean, I hate to disparage the guy, but he wasn't very good. And for whatever reason, he owed Ron money, AWC. So as payment for him owing Ron money, he gave him the costume and the gimmick. So when he needed a mini to wrestle Ultra Dragoncito, I became Mini Ultra Draw Jr. because I didn't have gear, and he just had to have this costume, and I wore it. You know, it was one of those costumes where, hey, you need a guy? Here, you're here. So when I said I did my first match that day in APW, the next day at a baseball stadium where the Lake Elsinore Storm played, I literally got home. I couldn't have bed that entire weekend. So Blitzkrieg actually wore my gear and wrestled Mini Ultra Taro Jr. the next day at the baseball stadium in Lake Elsinore against Ultra Dragoncito. So there you go. There's your. So that was like a gimmick that got passed around. I don't think Dragon was Ultra Taro, but I know Mr. Excitement was Ultra Taro Trace once. Because also I was Ultra Taro Jr., so he had to be Trace. It was like if you ever watch RevPro, like the guy in Arrow Gimmick or in Lucha Vuvu now, it's called the Crazy Chickens. Mm-hmm. It's more or less if you're starting, you're gonna get this gimmick. Whether you want it or not, you're gonna have to be this gimmick. Yeah. Until I inherited because Ultra Taro Jr. kind of stuck around for some reason.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's how that started.
And then you just kept it the whole time, basically.
Yeah, I kept it, and it was 2001. I was a little like about wrestling, burned out, and I had some stuff going on, and I was like, I'm gonna take a break. I can go into more details, and I'll just say I decided to take a break, and at the same time, I was a little frustrated because I knew people could never get my name right. Like, what? Your name's Ultra what? What Ultra what Junior? I'm like, Ultra Taro Jr. Can't you get that right? It's Ultraman. Do you know Ultraman? It's Ultra Taro. It's another character in the series. And people couldn't get the name right. And actually the guy who was Ultraman in Mexico actually got sued and he had to change his name. So I was like, I wasn't going to go anywhere, but you know what? I'll just be Taro. Let me just make it Taro. So we did an angle where I retired and we did the salt ceremony. At the end, I turned on disco and decided, like, I'm not Ultra Taro anymore. I'm Taro. And I was like a heel manager for a little while. And the ironic part for me was I was laughing because people would make fun of me by doing Ultra Taro Jr. dance. They would go, Ultra Taro Jr. Because I do the whole thing like, don't you call me that name anymore. I'm like, oh, God, this is my Daryl, like Daryl Strawberry Chan. I'm like, now you bastards get my name right.
All right, brother. I appreciate you being on the podcast, but now it is time to take it home.
All right.
The booker has ran out. He is pissed off. He is screaming.
I'm long-winded.
No, it's totally fine. But I'm okay with it. I'm going to fuck it. We'll do it live, right? Anyway, so these are some rapid fire questions. Feel free, of course, to digress and go further. Totally fine. There's no hard rules here. Let's see. Any more favorite road stories that you've had?
The most random one we did was we actually filled up a minivan of like eight of us or so. It was so crowded. I literally had to sit on the floorboard of a minivan from LA all the way to San Francisco. Are you aware of Incredibly Strange Wrestling?
Yes.
So this is where I'm going to.
I also know Ron Head pretty well.
Well, that's what I'm going to go into.
Okay.
So that's the beauty. I'm glad you know that. So there was Incredibly Strange Wrestling, and I actually refereed for one of the original shows under our mask back when they used to do Lollapalooza. But there was like a Northern California version and a Southern California version. But then Ron Head and JR started the Extremely Strange Wrestling. And we knew Ron. Ron actually came down. You remember I mentioned the show with Men Want Too Cold. Mm-hmm. He actually came down and actually filmed and announced our show for us. So we always had that connection. And I met J.R. Benson actually managed me in my first match against Ultra Dragoncito to go full circle.
Wow. Yeah.
So more or less, they wanted us to come up for this show. I'm like, okay, fine, let's do it. We were just, that's that point where we're just, oh my gosh, we got to get a booking. You know, it's 1998, I think. And I think I was even going to ref. I wasn't going to wrestle. We tried 6 hours all the way up there. And meanwhile, we're all sneaking into like a days in hotel room, motel. Come on, San Francisco. But a days in is like, you know, cheap for San Francisco. And meanwhile, it's 8 of us. And we have 2 beds. And it's like, how are we going to sneak in there? And we see this guy who's like a security guard and a black gentleman wearing a cowboy hat. And he's a security guard. We're like, how do we sneak by this guy? And like, okay. And then we would see him go by and we would just slowly go into the room and they'd be like, we would literally take the mattresses off the floor and like 2 of us would sleep on each mattress of the 2 beds. You know, I don't know if you ever had that in you ever seen that in Indy days. I was like, okay, good. We got all 8 of us to a bed.
Yeah.
Okay, phew, good. And we do this show, and the very first match is like J.R. Benson against somebody in some crazy extreme match. And they're like breaking like bongs over the head. There's glass and shit everywhere. And we're like, we wanted to do our stuff. We were going to do stupid gimmicks, but we were going to do our style because that's what we were all about. We just want to get a chance to do our lucha and pro wrestling, whatever we can. And we're looking at our shit in, brother. And everyone backstage was so pissed off that we said, we're not going to do this. We literally decided, like, we're not going to do this. And I don't know, Disco Machine did not go into this on the show when he was on a View. So he was supposed to have his first match that night on that show. And his opponent, his family came up from Southern California for this show, came in, saw all this crazy stuff going on in the ring, and his family and him just left. They left the show entirely. It was like a little room of like 20 people at the most. It was just night. It was just like, well, it was extreme hardcore match in 1998 when no people not seen that back then.
Yeah.
And we were bitter, going and we decided, like, no, we're not going to do this. And another crazy thing that happened in that show was, what's her name? Jim Cornette's wife, Stacy, was like a second in that match. She literally jumps off the apron at some point during the match and completely, like, breaks her ankle in like 2 or 3 places. And you see her laying there while all this bedlam and mayhem's going on. She's screaming in terror. We're trying to get her to the back and call an ambulance for her and just get her out of there. And just like, what the fuck is happening here? We just want to do a match, and meanwhile, I'm like trying to clean the ring. I'm wearing a mask as a referee, and the show was literally called Exposing the Business. Ronhead's like, "Oh, hey, what are you doing here?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm the referee. Don't worry." And I'm just like, "Oh, wait, weren't you out here?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm the master referee. Don't worry. I'm going to be wrestling later. I'm sweeping the ring up." And literally, we went out there, did a couple spots, and ABC mentioned they got like a thumbtack in his ass. He's like, "Oh, forget this. I'm out of here." And we all literally just like boycotted the show because we were so upset. And we all these stupid gimmicks. Like one of us was going to be OJ the Butcher. To have Abdul the Butcher. We had an OJ mask to be OJ the Butcher because it was extremely strange wrestling. And just, but yeah, we went all the way to San Francisco to wrestle a match. We didn't even get to wrestle. Yeah. And we literally had one of the wrestlers' family come and leave and he didn't wrestle.
Yeah, for anyone listening, not super familiar, they had I believe there was an AIDS needles match. That promotion.
The bed of hypodermic needles. That's what it was. Yeah,
there's a lot of stuff they had there. There's
some weird stuff, and they liked us because they're just looking for dudes to work, and we were just like, we're not doing this stuff, and they were like,
nope.
Okay, yeah, sorry, we get it. They should have had us go on first and then do their hardcore stuff later. But
yeah,
oh well, nothing like all of us driving to San Francisco 8 hours each way to not even like wrestle, but still get something. I guess I think we all got paid a little something.
What's your favorite move or hold you never used?
The joke was I had 3 holds only. That was usually the running joke amongst me, is that I would just do Ranas, DTs, and neck breakers. And then I realized later, I'm like, shoot, I should have just done like submissions. At least do some submissions, because something I didn't really think about when I was wrestling, but in my later days, I would watch Rey Mysterio. You got to think of doing a move that you could do to any person. That's why the 619 works. You can do that to anybody.
Yeah.
I can't give anybody a Rana. Or, because some people just don't know how to take Ranas. Believe me, I've been dropped my head a couple times on Ranas. Or, neck breaker maybe, DT maybe, but it's just a matter of how you do it, how you place it. And I realized, like, shoot, if I could have just got a good, like, submission hold or like a good roll-up or something that I could just do on anybody, as long as it gives it credibility to where you make it work in a match, then it'll work for you. Like, I love it's called the Fuller leg lock. It's like a variation of the Indian death hold. Like, the only guy I think uses it now, his name's Robbie Eagles, and he wrestles in New Japan, and I'm watching it. Oh my God, you're doing the full leg lock, even though it's a different name over there. He has a different name for it.
He's Australian, right?
Yes, he's Australian. Yeah, one of my favorite guys, and I'm like, oh, I hope he gets back to Japan soon, because I was definitely a big fan of his.
Yeah. So what's the injury roll call?
Luckily for me, not too bad, believe it or not. You would think, oh my God, this guy runs Super Dragon a bunch. Is he dead? I'm like, nope. I mean, let me think. I mean, I got knocked loopy a couple times against him because, he does lay it in. Let me think. Almost one of the worst injuries was a match against Disco Machine, of all people, because the first thing we did in the match is I'm waiting for him to come out. It's like a big grudge match. I'm waiting for him to come out like this, and he comes from the other entrance. I don't know he's coming, and he gives me a drop kick off the top rope, and the problem is I fell forward, And the way he literally landed on the back of my leg, and I almost dislocated my patella. Like, my leg was bugging me for a while. I'm like, oh, no, this is not good. And I went, and they were like, oh, yeah, you almost dislocated your patella, blah, blah, you might want to do some physical therapy, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, nah, okay, whatever. You know, and, you know, my neck, you know, I try to stretch out my neck when I can. Like, I'm literally, like, moving around here, crack here and there, but it's never been that bothersome. The worst I could think of in the ring was I got knocked out pretty bad by Excalibur once, of all people. It was, I think it was the benefit show for the Messiah when he got his thumb cut off for Epic Pro Wrestling. I literally remember getting an elbow from Excalibur, which, you know, picture his arms. You know, they're almost like pipe arms.
Yeah.
I gave him one elbow, and I'm turning around going, oh, my gosh, he hit me really hard. And next thing I know, I'm just, like, laying there, I was like, a couple minutes later, I'm like, what's happening? You know? And literally, they're picking me up, and I'm giving a cycle driver off the top rope while I'm, like, coming back from being, like, knocked out. You know, which I'm like, that's really not safe in retrospect, you know?
Yeah. Oh,
and I'm
wow.
like, oh, God, I got to get home. And literally the next morning, I was going on a road trip with my parents to Colorado to visit family. We were going to drive from L.A. all the way to Colorado, and I know I'm like, I'm concussed. I can't sleep. So I'm like, oh, God, how am I going to do this? You know, and I felt okay. Like, I felt decent the next day. I went back, got checked later. I was like, yeah, you got a mild concussion. I'm like, pretty good, only mild. I'll take that. You know?
Yeah.
But considering the kind of the abuse I've taken, I'm okay. I would go to work, and you would see, like, ASIC footprints on my back for a day or two after Master Dragon, but I'm okay for the most part, I think. Hopefully, knock on wood. My memory works. I'm talking to you a lot. You know?
There you go. And who's got the hardest chops in the business that you've taken?
Well, I mean, Dragon's definitely an easy one to do, you know. I know the time I wrestled Evo, he was pretty stiff on stuff, but, you know, the one thing I learned early on is that if you watch, you know, sometimes you do like the Ric Flair style chop like this, and it doesn't always work. If you always want a chop to work, if you watch Lucha, you see they go overhead like that. That is always going to sting. If you want to get somebody, I'm like, oh, I'm like, I'm doing over the top. I know those are like, can't miss. It's going to suck for the other person, because believe me, I know it sucked for me. But, you know, you learn. Do it that way if you want to get a guaranteed thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, if you guys get anything stiff, of course you can Dragon.
Speaking of working stiff in the ring, was there any times when somebody was working too stiff with you that this was not an agreed upon thing? This was not like you and Dragon knowing you guys are going to lay it into each other. There's a time when you're like, hey, what the fuck's going on right now? Or
luckily not. Luckily not. I don't really think of a particular time. Usually it would be like I'm wrestling Dragon somewhere in an unfamiliar area. Like, I give you an example. I wrestled Dragon in New York for a group called Lucha Extreme Wrestling. It was run by guys who I guess knew Rob Black, and they were trying to start like a Lucha Extreme Wrestling. And we're doing our stuff, and backstage, meanwhile, like the original La Parca, Shocker, and these guys are like watching this going, dude, he's taking it, like they're thinking like Dragon's taking advantage of me. And Dragon and I are just doing a regular match. I'm like, yeah, you know, I know it's going to be stiff, but it's like, it's going to come with the territory. I'm like, it's fine, whatever. You know? And believe me, there's people who were like hoping I would like just stiff the hell out of them back. And I did a little bit like in our mass match, which made it work, but that particular night was fine because I think it was Zogre. If you know Zogre is from Los Luchas, he literally was like, he was trying to calm down La Parca. I think it was La Parca in particular. He was trying to calm him down. Like, dude, why is this guy beating him up? Like, I think La Parca's getting kind of pissed. And he looks at me and he says, oh, don't worry, man. That's his cousin. It's okay. And he didn't know that we actually were really cousins.
Oh.
I'm like, wow, you actually really said something that's actually, he's like, what? You guys really are? I'm like, yeah, that's why it's fine. Whatever. You know, you can trust family members. Just a family squabble. You're going to beat up your brother. Or family members more, you're going to beat up the average Joe, I suppose.
Hey, that's not a bad accomplishment for you and Super D there. You guys worked La Parca into a shoot.
I guess. I know. It's like, whoa. Like I was like, oh, yeah, because I came back and they're telling me, I'm like, oh, God, really? This is still happening? You know, it's because people haven't seen us and what we're doing, you know, we're laying it in, you know.
Yeah.
Supposed to be a work brother. Which, believe me, that's gotten us in trouble. You know, that's gotten us eat, you know, work a little snug.
Any particular, like, stories involving that, like, you know, guys getting pissed that you guys were working snug with them at all?
Not usually with them, because we usually were just we usually just be careful. We're going to be stuck with each other, but I was never, I wasn't really the much strikes person. I was more or less, especially my peak, I'd be like, I knew like my role was like a dragon or whatever. I'm like, I'm the sympathetic baby face. I'm going to take a beating. I'm going to like sell it. Because that's the one thing that makes me a little sad about wrestling now is I don't see enough selling. Because that's when you're going to get sympathy. If you're selling right, you do it right, you make people care, they want you to come back. That's why selling is such a crucial part of wrestling, and I don't see it as much as I would like. I'll see like people pop up and things like, oh gosh, come on, you don't know how the art of it. There's such an art to selling where you can just make it look so much better than what it could be. And
yeah, and I think especially now in the last few months, it's gotten worse because without crowds, I think it really messes with their mind as far as like, they know there's a camera, but it's different when you like can look over and kind of see people like concerned or like,
And I at least was, at least every time we're working in front of 15, 20 people and I'm just like, I'm still going to sell. Maybe part of my thing because I'm like, oh my gosh, Dragon, lay off a little bit. Probably that, or whoever I'm working with because I'm like, oh, gosh, lay off a little bit. Like, let me sell this. Let me make this work, And part of it might have been, I was like, oh, God, you hit me hard. Give me a second.
Yeah, exactly.
It wasn't like we were hurting each other. You can hit each other hard, but in the right places.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you ever watch one of those strike exchanges like New Japan or whatever, they're laying it in, but they're not. Usually, it's rare when they actually hurt each other. It's more the head drops what you got to worry about,
Yeah. There's like that, that very special crook of the neck area where you can just literally forearm the shit out of someone. And they're just doing. You see, there's always videos like on Twitter, like of people showing like old school New Japan matches where they're just doing it back and forth, and you're like, good God, like they're really.
It's snug, but it's not really hurting the guys for the most part. And where you gotta be careful is slaps, because I know there's guys that slap Dragon, and he was just like, I could see him, and he's like, you like yelling, like mad at me backstage after, I'm like, really, you're gonna be mad at me for stiffing you? Get out of here.
That is funny. That's a nice turnaround.
Yeah, exactly. My God, I got laid in somewhere, brother.
What's the craziest fan interaction you've had? Especially like lucha shows, especially from what a lot of the luchadors I've talked to tend to be a little bit more crazy than American fans.
I didn't work that many straight lucha shows, so I didn't have that as much. The weird one for me would have been after my wrestling days because I finished I lost my mask match in 03, and literally I'm in my college about 4 or 5 years later, and a guy just comes up to me, he's like, Kevin Lyon? And I'm like, yeah, and I have no idea I know this guy, and then and then just like, oh, Taro, and I'm like, what? Because mind you, I lost my mask in November of 2003.
Yeah,
I wrestled a couple more times. It's like, how would you know me by face? You know what I mean? That's why I was just like, it happened to me once too when another time in the college about a year or two later, I'm like, this is so weird. So weird. Especially because I knew I was going to lose my mask. It wasn't a secret if you knew what was going on. And I made sure like the last year or so, any show I went to, my mask is on as I pull in, go on the show. My mask does not come off till I was driving away and a couple blocks away, and the mask comes off. Because I was like, you know what? I got to make this mean something.
Yeah. Wow.
I'm going to lose the mask, make it worth something. I don't know if it's how much it was worth, but,
Hey, no, we got, on the Lucha editions of the show, there are dudes who, later on in their careers, and they're still holding on. They do the interview in the mask, and they're like, "This is, this is what it is." So it's a serious thing they take, Oh
no, absolutely, and I realized like I better take it serious because, more or less, I decided in 2003 I was a little burned out on things. I said, I told Dragon like, you know what, I think it's gonna be my last year, and we're talking. He's like, okay, well, I want your mask then. I'm like, okay, fair enough. We decided that already. And this is like in the beginning of the year. So I realized, like, well, you know what? I got to make this mean something, And so, and literally, like, we had one of the hardcore fans who came up to me and said to me, like, you're the only guy I don't know who you are. And I'm like, and you know how many mask guys are in RevPro, and I'm the only one who didn't know, then I knew I was doing something right.
Yeah.
Because people don't want to know everything, You will go to the shows and you'll see, like, I've never gone to lucha shows back when I first was starting. Like guys would show up and you would never see about their mask. Like Neil Mastras, my gosh, that's what you would wear in the shower, or switch out, somewhere in there.
Yeah. Well, I love that. I forgot one of the other guys that got interviewed on the show, one of the luchadors. I forgot who it is, and I'm annoyed at myself that I don't remember. But he told a story of a fan basically like wanting to fight him and like all this stuff. And then after the match, he walked right by the guy because he didn't have a mask on.
Yep.
And the guy was just standing there, kind of looking, and he just walked right past him.
I can tell you one of those from being in person. I went to a lucha show where Psicosis, the WCW Psicosis, literally went upstairs. Dan was like, threw something at him. He went up and punched the fan in the face. This is before he's in WCW. This is like about a year, maybe 6 months before. And the guy, someone called the cops. And I'm just hanging out backstage. And I can't say hang out backstage, but I was filming or hanging out, whatever. I'm by the curtain. And the cops are looking for Psicosis. He's standing right there with his mask off, but everyone's like, oh, he left already. And the cops like, okay, well, whoever this guy is, he had to get his warrant out for his arrest or whatever. And I'm like, is so funny and so lucha. You know what I mean? Like, don't worry, you're fine.
There you go.
Your mask on, no one's gonna know who you are. It's true.
Yeah, it's
like,
amazing.
Oh my God. There's a crazy fan story. See, for just me myself as a fan in the audience.
Yeah. Besides hurting you in a match, what's the worst thing someone could do when you're in a match with them?
Not hurting me. I feel like that's where it was where I mostly just got hurt because I'm like, I have a couple guys who don't really know how to take moves like a Rana, and I'd just be like, oh shoot, I just got dropped in my head because you don't know how to take it. You know what I mean? Like, you don't know. Sometimes you're not gonna know how experienced someone is until you're way too deep into a match, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Because like I said, luckily I never really got taken advantage of. And might have been me just being very particular in that I wasn't looking at this as a career. I mostly wanted to just stick to wrestling people I knew who I want to wrestle. And luckily I was mostly booked like that, which definitely my benefit because I was like, whatever, I don't want to wrestle so-and-so. I just want to just wrestle Dragon and my friends and just have a good time, and anything comes out of it, great. Because I wasn't looking to make money. I made money outside of wrestling, in wrestling wise, which that's something I get to. So I got to figure out a good way to get into that story. I don't know if anybody really knows about that.
Let's go into it. Let's do it.
Okay. So, and you can look this up here's your research. You can look this up on YouTube. Through Conan, American Wild Child, Ron Rivera got in touch with people. Do you know who Nikki Cox is at all?
Nikki Cox, the actress?
Yes, the actress, yes.
Yeah, she's married to Jay Moore.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
I'm going to go way back. She first got her break on Unhappily Ever After.
Yeah, with the talking bunny or whatever the hell that thing was. Yeah.
So, see, I can't believe you wouldn't know about the show. So, in around the year 2000 on the WB, there was a TV show called Nikki where the premise of the show is it's based in Las Vegas. She is a aspiring showgirl, and her husband on the show is an aspiring wrestler. You never heard of the show?
No.
And now you're probably like, I was 6. Wait, how old are you? Because you're the same age as John, right?
I graduated in 2002.
So you've been about 16 or 17 when this show aired.
Yeah.
Okay. Would you love to see anything wrestling related on network TV?
Yeah.
2000.
I'm wondering how this.
Like 9 o'clock. Like, how did you not know about the show, right?
Yeah, this is like there must have just been a weird blind spot out of nowhere. It's so weird.
But it wasn't like it's a popular show because again, it's WB. But this is something that like I don't know how many wrestling fans even know about this. It's so weird. So AWC got the connection to this, and he supplied through Conan. He supplied a ring, and he got the job as stunt coordinator. So this would have been, like I said, 2000 or so, and so it's like, oh hey, so we need wrestlers for a scene. So he would bring in the RevPro guys. You bring in Dragon and Excalibur and whoever, and like, okay, here's what we need. And literally, like the very first episode, it's funny because they like, we want this big move. So Dragon would do the Phoenix Splash. You know the Phoenix Splash, right? Where you're on the top of it, and this you turn to the 450. They have him do it several times on camera, and they wanted to use the best take for a shot in the show. And that's where he actually messed up his knee for the first time back in this would have been May or June of 2000. And he ended up having to have knee surgery like about a month or two after that. And literally, it ends up being on a monitor backstage as the actors are talking to each other in a scene. And it's just like, whoa. But if you end up, I'll have to figure out where to tell you to look this up. I know this is on YouTube, but if you watch that show, you'll see like Excalibur backstage, myself, Rising Sun. But my break was I'm the perfect size referee. And the first celebrity we brought in Kevin Nash. And this is like 2000. And it's like, Ron's like, Kevin, I want you to referee the scene. I'm like, all right, oh, of course. I'm like, yeah, of course. You know? And so literally it's like, he's called the Big Easy, but his character is, the Big Easy Kevin Nash. You can't call him Big Sexy or whatever. But literally the premise of the show was he was homosexual. But he tried to, because the premise is Nikki's husband thought he was going for Nikki. And he's like, no, I'm gay. And that's the whole episode. And I refereed the wrestling scene on that episode. And the end, the big thing was to prove he wasn't gay, he actually kissed the wrestler actor on the lips at the big climax of the wrestling episode.
This sounds familiar now for some reason to me.
All right.
Now that visual in my head is
if
like,
you're watching like Kevin Nash, Nikki Cox, you'll probably see this. You'll probably find the wrestling scenes, and
yeah.
If you just do a dive into that show, I believe a lot of it's on YouTube. You'll see, like I said, you'll see me masked as Ultra Child Jr. You'll see Super Dragon. You'll see me unmasked. I refereed like to the point where I was told I can't be on the show anymore. I was that much of an extra on the show. But we actually had some celebrity extras. Like, the big one for me was we were gonna have Terry Funk on the show. And I'm just like, Terry Funk's my favorite wrestler of all time. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. And the role was supposed to be a broken down wrestler. And Terry, literally, apparently the day before said, I ain't going to do this, and canceled on them. So it's like, what do we do? Where are we going to find a wrestler last minute? So believe it or not, Randy Savage was in town filming Spider-Man at the exact same time. And they brought Macho Man Randy Savage over to be on the Nikki episode, to be this old broken down wrestler. And mind you, this is 2000 Macho Man.
He's ripped.
Like, jacked to the gills. Like
he's a monster.
He's a bone saw. And I'm just like, what? And it was absurd, but I'm just like, I'm in the ring with the Macho Man on television. And I'm just like, wow, deep breath. And I'm like, oh my God. And that, like, I tell people, like, look, that's the one. That's almost more. I tell people, like, you want to see me in the ring, and that's what I'll bring up. Like, look up, like, I'll show me up with the Macho Man TV. They're like, oh, and that was a great pay debut because I actually joined the Screen Actors Guild through that, and so did Ron. We were featured extras, and like, shoot, why not become a Screen Actors Guild member? Who knows where we can get with this?
Yeah,
and we actually had Fabulous Moolah on an episode, and Mae Young was just there hanging out, and the second season actually did an episode where I actually wrestled Kevin Nash in a match where I did the stunt work filling in for the actor, and I wore a mask, and we did like, I got paid like stunt rate for SAG, which back in 2001 was like $600 a day minimum, and that's the minimum. Like, have I ever made $600? Have I made $600 a day in wrestling? Never. No.
Yeah.
It was like 3 days. It was like the easiest match I ever had in my life. I'm like, oh, this is the life right here. And we parlayed that also into those episodes of Angel where Ron coordinated scenes. There was a Lucha Libre tie into an episode of Angel.
I remember that.
Yeah, so there you go. So if you remember the episode, it was actually Mr. Excitement, Super Dragon, and I
had no idea it was them in that show. That's so funny.
So the good guys in the match were like actor stuntmen, and then the three opponents was Dragon, Excitement. I'm really sorry, I'm spacing out who the third person is right now. Shoot, I'm really mad. I can't remember who it is. But yeah, if you're an Angel fan, you look that up, you can find that, and you'll be like, what? And I refereed that scene. And the ironic part of it was, I got like the day before, I literally was doing every single spot, showing the actors how to do it, and they could not handle what we were doing. They were just like, what do you mean you're taking these falls and these falls and these falls? Because they're used to everything being like, okay, there's a mat here, there's a mat there. Like, we're taking bumps to the floor, and they're just looking at us like, you guys nuts? They're taking up all the floor because they're professional stuntmen. There's a mat everywhere they're landing.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
I was thinking.
Matt Sinister was on the episode later because that's the scene with the older with us in the 50s. It was a modern match where it was like Matt Sinister in RevPro wrestling like 3 minis, going full circle back to the mini aspect in a scene. It was a weird episode, but
Yeah.
that was a good exposure and good money made for some of us.
Yeah, and I gotta go back and look at that because I've
I
seen.
figured I'm glad to just get that out there because I'm like, who the hell knows about that?
Yeah.
American Watch I made his most money in wrestling is where I made my most money in wrestling, arguably. For sure for me.
Yeah.
So, Ron,
Wow.
too. Yeah. Oh yeah, that SAG money was good money. Let me tell you.
Was there ever a time you were legitimately surprised by another worker in the ring?
Let me think. I mean, I have to go back to that first Natural Smoke I Can See though, because literally he made me look like I was a wrestler. Like I was like, I have no business being here. And we're doing like lucha spots. We're doing a couple ranas. I did a dive. He did a tope con hilo between the ropes onto me. And I'm like, you're trusting me on this? And I'm just like, wow, you're making me look good. And I'm like, I have no business being here. I mean, that's the most obvious example. And that's just a guy who obviously a confident professional because he could have just kicked my ass all over the place if he wanted to. But
Yeah.
maybe no one's smart enough for the fact this is my first match. That might be true as well. It's more or less the ref and Ron and I, we just put together the most basic match possible and just do our stuff. And like, okay, there it is. That's the most obvious example I can think of for sure because
Yeah.
carry someone like to their first match and make it look passable, that's a hell of a professional right there.
You kind of already alluded to one time this happened, but Booker's stiffing you on pay.
Oh.
What are some times it's happened? You already mentioned one. Maybe some funny excuses they try to come up with as to why they can't pay. Nowadays it wouldn't have been back then at the time because you didn't really have it at the time. But nowadays a lot of people have told me on this podcast, "Oh, I'll PayPal you later," which is
Gosh, look, I never had anything like that. And I just laugh because I see people like, oh, well, I'm not getting paid, but you mentioned stand-up comedy. If you're breaking into stand-up comedy, it's pay to play, right? You have to buy a certain amount of tickets and sell tickets. Like I never knew that was a thing. Apparently there was a famous fit out in the East Coast called USA Pro. I would hear to get on the show, if you sold 25 tickets or so, you would get on the show, regardless of where you were on there. Because the first time I got flown out to New York to wrestle for LXW, that group I mentioned earlier, the night before there was a show up the street. Oh, the old Elks Lodge where ECW used to run in Queens.
Yeah.
We were staying at the same hotel with all these dudes. And there was apparently it was 16 matches, a 5.5-hour show because, if you sell 40 tickets or whatever, you're going to get on the show. I was like, oh my God, ugh. But that's pay to play. You have to give it like that. And it's same for bands breaking in. Sometimes you're going to have to pay to play. And I'm just like, oh God, it's terrible that we have to go through that. But I had to watch the Disco Machine episode to make sure the fun one for us in particular didn't get mentioned. So in July of 1999, there was a lucha group that used us, and back then, RevPro was like, oh, great, we're getting a booking. And it was Dragon against American Wild Child. And they did their match, and they got stiffed. And the promoter, he was a wrestler named The Kiss, and I think at this point he's called The Punisher. He was one of those guys who's just running a weekly Lucha Libre show in L.A. There was 2 or 3 of them at certain points, running every weekend for years in LA. And this guy was like, I'll get you next time. And so the date they're going to use, American Wild Child and Dragon were wrestling in Hawaii. Oh gosh, excuse me, they're wrestling in Hawaii, good for them. So he set it up to where I was going to be myself, Yakuza, Mr. Excitement, Disco Machine. We're going to go there and he said, okay, don't worry, I'll make it up to you guys. I'll make it up to them for you guys, not getting paid. He's like, okay, cool. So we go up there, and it's Disco Machine against Excitement and me versus Yakuza. And, of course, it's a Lucha Flyer, so they got all of our names. The only name they got right was Mr. Excitement. Instead of Yakuza, it was Yazuza, Y-A-Z-U-Z-A. I was Ultra Row Jr., and Mr. Excitement they got right, and Disco Machine was Dico machine, DICO machine. So we go out there, we do our stuff, and they're like, oh, okay, that was a good night. Cool, whatever. And we're waiting to get paid. And I don't know which of us went in there to get it. Comes out, and our pay was $5. You want me to finish the story? Total. Not $5 for each of us.
Oh my God.
$5 total for all four of us.
Crumple that shit, throw it right in his face, dude.
And that's making up for American Wild Style Dragon getting stiff, not getting anything like 2 weeks before that. And we're just like, are you freaking kidding me? And I'm like, oh, I mean, like I told you earlier, I wasn't looking for this for a living. I'm like, I'm not going to do this. Why? What? Why is it going to benefit me? I'm not going to do this ever again. And I remember it was just like, oh, oh man, there was some steaming that night, let me tell you. But that's my favorite example. I'm like, yeah, I got paid $1.25.
Yeah.
We got $5. I was supposed to split that amongst four of us.
Yeah, that's I've never, I'm not too crazy about like, I don't freak out over monetary things, but like it's the principle of that.
Yeah.
It's just I'd rather you just didn't fucking pay me then. Like, what is this? Like, yeah, that's the way I look at it. It's like, going to a restaurant, tipping someone 75 cents. It'd just be like, hey, dick, what are you doing? It's just, exactly. It's, I don't know that.
Yeah. Like, what? Come on.
Yeah,
Jared mine will just not tip instead of just offending the guy.
Ugh.
That's
What's
the like, good. I'm glad I just going to tell that one because that's my favorite one.
Yeah.
Those times the RevPro I didn't get paid, but like I told you earlier, I helped like sell the videotapes on eBay or whatever. So I was getting some money for that and helping out around the office.
Yeah. What's the best mistake you made in pro wrestling?
I guess saying yes to that first match. I mean, honestly, because it took, like I said, it took a long time for me to say, okay, fine. I'm like, I don't want to do this. And like literally, it was like 9 months later was when I had my second match. And it was only because I was going for Blitzkrieg. We did a lucha show in Fresno. Blitzkrieg got a little messed up, and I remember the match. The next day, it's like, all right, you have your gear, right? I'm like, yeah. I'm like, oh, God. Like, I don't want to do this. I'm like, I don't really want to do this, do I? And it was fun as long as I didn't get hurt. And I remember that night I forgot about this injury. First time I got concussed. The end of this match, I'm down, and it's literally going to be the finish. The guy, my friend, not a friend right now, but is a friend, really. He pulls me up and picked me up off the mat, and I had like a mask like this. I don't know if you can see it. Total slip on, right off. And lucha, that's on that DQ.
Yeah.
So I'm like, oh no. And literally, I'm like, that's not supposed to happen. I'm trying to fix the mask. And the finish was he's going to give me a lariat and give me a submission. I'm like, okay, cool. And literally, my mask is barely on. I'm adjusting my mask as he's throwing me in the ropes. And because I'm disoriented, he lariats me. It's more or less boom here in the face. And I fall, and I'm just laying there like, we got to go to the finish. And then I remember like, oh yeah, this is the finish. And I'm just laying there. I'm like, oh God. And everyone's out eating afterwards. And I'm like, I'm eating French fries. Like, I don't want to eat right now. I'm like, oh gosh. Good time, let me tell you.
Speaking of which, yeah, I just somebody posted on Twitter. It was today. They said they showed that clip of Blitzkrieg in WCW.
Which I saw the photo going around on a mask. I'm like, oh my gosh, it's the first time I saw anybody post.
It was him doing the Phoenix Splash. It was him doing the Phoenix Splash.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
It's the first time it was on American television, the Phoenix Splash.
Yeah. So to go way, 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 way back, we used to actually buy the Japanese magazines at the Japanese bookstores in LA. And in 1995, we saw, like, apparently Blitzkrieg had the idea for the Phoenix Splash, believe it or not. He had an idea in his head, but we weren't wrestling anymore. We couldn't do it. And there was Hayabusa doing the move. And it's literally one of those things where it's like 7 or 8 photos in a row, and each was like an arrow showing the progression of the move. And it's just like, oh no, Hayabusa did it. And I'm like, oh man. It's just like, well, we're wrestling. At that point, it's like, we were looking to get a match. Not me, but, most of those guys were looking to get a match or two a year, honestly. because again, like I said, we were definitely the outlaws back in that period.
Yeah. Wow.
But it's funny because he had that vision in his mind of the move, and it's like then he got to do it a few years later, and yeah, I saw the one that goes on Callow, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because him getting the WCW took like about 6 months or so. Because do you know if the Thunder tryout match is on YouTube anywhere or on Daily Mo anywhere?
Oh, it probably is.
Yeah, because it was August of '98. It was Super Dragon and Blitzkrieg against American Wildchild and Hellblazer, and they did like a 4-minute match, did everything they could under the sun, and literally I wasn't there. It was the Oakland Coliseum, and people were like losing their minds. It was like a Thunder taping. Apparently they got really over. And
God, Thunder at Oakland? I think I was at that show.
yes, so if you were there early enough, you might have saw that match.
I think I was at that show.
There you go. That was the dark match on that show. But literally, somehow it was on the satellite feed. That's the only way the video ever came out of this. And they did like a 4-minute match. And what I always heard was they go backstage and literally Goldberg's at the curtain and hugs Blitzkrieg. And they said literally, it's like Blitzkrieg disappeared. And like no one knew who we were. We were like,
yeah.
And after that day, they were saying like, oh yeah, blah blah blah. You guys are all getting signed or whatever. But literally, that was August. It was the first match of Blitzkrieg in WCW was January, I believe. It was like in Buffalo, and he had a second tryout I think 2 weeks before that. And it was weird because it was like, do you know Superboy? Do you remember who Superboy is? Yeah, I don't remember the team, but it was Superboy, Blitzkrieg, Luchador Vexel, Moscador Merced, and Felino, Nick Costas' brother. They were paired up somehow in a match in like Minneapolis for like a dark match, like a tryout. And it goes like a week or two later when Blitzkrieg made his debut, wearing still that horrible gear that he got made in like 1996 before he went to Japan. It's just like, oh god, this gear. Oh my god, this gear.
Oh man.
Yeah. Luckily they had better gear made later.
Yeah. Well, there was a long time when you could tell, especially in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was like a few gear makers total. Because there was a point when like everyone had like Michael Modest and Donovan Morgan, they both had like the Dean Malenko Iceman shorts at one point. Yeah. Like there was a template of designs that they just kept selling to everyone. And it was very like...
And remember, think of this. We have Luchador. We need Lucha costumes, you know? Like, I think like Wild Child and Blitzkrieg and all these guys, Blitzkrieg's going to do a tour of Japan for the summer of '96, and him and like Hellblazer and Blitzkrieg's brother, Suicide Kid, they all were going to get gear made by this guy, and it came back and it was just atrocious. Like, it wasn't even, like, it was barely wearable. I was like, now what are we going to do? And it's like, let's get a mask, a different mask, and we just put it on him, and he just wore it for 2 months in Japan, and okay, we'll just get gear made later, and, we would always joke, like, the famous lucha maker, his name was Bucio in Mexico City, and we would order stuff through whoever, and like, oh yeah, it's gonna come from Bucio. Like, yeah, really, it's coming from Bucio. It looks like it's made by Bucio Tres. You know what I mean? It's just like you never know what you're gonna get. Like, luckily my gear, we ordered it through Martina WW, and it came back okay. Like, just because she naturally drew the outline for my Taro outfit, because like I said, the Ultra Junior was hand me down from the previous Ultra Taro. And then it just ended up being an accidental coincidence for me that the button ended up being puffy. Because that'd be my entire gimmick in the end. You know?
Well, at least you guys did that because, I'm sure you've seen this at multiple lucha promotions or just regular indie promotions, actually. More regular promotions, not lucha promotions. I'm wrong on that point. Half the time, it's like, we have a young wrestler. What do we do with him? Throw a mask on him, and he'll be, El Superhero, and you're like, dude, that's an El Hijo del Santo mask. Like, come on, man. Like he comes out with a blue demon mask, and you're like, dude.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Dude, don't do that.
Yeah, I mean, but it's like, we just need a body. It's like, I get him out there, and it's just hope nobody knows. You know what I mean? You get away with that in the '90s more than nowadays.
It might be the Kikataro thing, but what's the hardest you've laughed at an indie show?
That one is probably number one in being in a match. Something I really need to rewatch is, as a fan, I remember the match I laughed at the hardest was Top Gun Tower against El Generico from, I think it was Wars, the name of the group. And I saw John retweet that recently. Like, oh my gosh, I got really sit down and watch that match. I remember just like cracking up hysterically at that match. Early on, the very first show I did, it was this guy named the Role Model against the Gemini Kid, who later was in RevPro as Ebony Blade Esquire. He was a guy who came up from Boston. His name's Eric Anderson. He's been around for a long time. Definitely a guy I've known for, my gosh, 25 plus years now. But they did it at the beginning of the match. Eric Anderson's going on and on. He throws a chair in the ring. Gemini Kid sits on the chair, and literally the second he sits, his one of those plastic chairs just breaks under him. And I'm looking at, and this is literally the second match I wrestled my entire life. And he's just looking at me like, oh shit. And I'm just like, how do I hide my face? Hide my face, hide my face. And like because the heel is the one on the floor, and he's like, ha ha ha, look at you. And I'm like, don't see the heel, don't make fun of the baby face. I'm like, oh, come on. But I've seen it happen with fans, unfortunately, where they'll sit in the plastic chair and the chairs just break, and it's just like, I'm like, oh, that's not okay.
Yeah. Yeah, it's hard not to laugh at.
Yeah.
It's
I'm
because
like,
it's so sudden. It's just
sorry,
so sudden.
I'm laughing.
Yeah. You've seen a lot of them. What's the worst gimmick you've seen?
Oh my God. I gotta think about this because I've been to so many lucha shows over the years. Like one of the most ridiculous ones, there was a lucha gimmick called Mechanico. And literally he was dressed like a mechanic with a lucha mask. It's like you would have like gimmicks like that, like, what? You're a mechanic. Mechanical. It's like,
what did he have? Like the wrenches over the eyes? Like
I don't remember that, but he would have like kind of like the work shirt, you know what I mean? And like the Dickie pants, and it would work, and it'd be a little bit more friendly for wrestling, but still it's just like, this is your gear, Mechanico. I wish I could remember what his mask looked like, because that's the point. He might have had that on there. I'm like, that is gold. That is just, I'm like, I appreciate that way more now than I did back in 1990s. I'm like, oh my God, this guy sucks. Why is he on these shows? I don't want to see this guy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then there's some of the fun exoticos, like one locally lucha-wise was like Rosa Zavaje, you know what I mean? Just those exotic gimmicks. It's just like, oh, these are so much. It's stupid, but it's fun. You know, you can make it. You gotta make it work for you. You know what I mean? Lucha, there's some really bad lucha gimmicks over the years.
Yeah,
really, really bad.
Any quote unquote big name guys? You always see them. They're working indie shows, especially WCW, WWE, WWF. Any of that stuff where they know they're bigger than the show. They act like they're bigger than the show. Just give off a bad vibe.
Oh no. The only one I could think of is involves me directly is, MLW, obviously, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the very first MLW show was in 2001, I want to say, at the ECW Arena. Me and Rising Sun got flown out specifically to do a Lucha Libre style match. But we're the only guys who knew Lucha. It was, see if I can remember the match here. It was me, Super Hentai and Prince Nana, who later was like a manager in like ROH.
Yeah, I remember Prince Nana.
Versus Rising Sun, Abunai, and Devon Storm. Like one day, I was like, wait, what? So the idea of this match is it's Lucha Libre rules, 2 out of 3 falls. Like, do you know enough about Lucha where you know the captain's rules applies to Lucha?
I didn't know about the captain's rules. No.
Okay, so the basic Lucha Libre match, in a trios match, there's a captain of each team. And to win a fall, you have to beat the 2 guys or beat the captain. So the idea was we want to introduce Lucha, but we want to do 2 out of 3 falls with the captains. And I'm like, this doesn't sound like the best idea. And then on top of that, the Tombstone Powder called El Martinete. It's like the move of death in Lucha Libre. It's like if you do, powders are illegal in Mexico. If you do the Martinete, it's like you're done for it. So to get that idea of the Martinete over, Abunai was going to get tombstoned by one of the Rudos. The second fall needed to be carted out. So now picture this on a 2002 indie show in Philadelphia with like Bam Bam Eagle on the show, Jerry Lynn, Shane Douglas, guys like that. Now picture this match mixing with all that. On paper, it just sounded like a really bad idea.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just like,
you're introducing new rules. There's a whole lot that people have to grasp.
Yes. And And so what happened was I knew the basic foundation, and I'm like, okay, I've been watching Lucha for a really long time. I can help figure this all out, put this all together. And everyone's there except for Devin Storm. I had the basic idea for the match and figuring it all out because it's not an easy match to structure for an American audience. And he shows up last after everyone gets there, and he more or less came up to me saying, I should kick your ass. I should have kicked your ass out there tonight. And I'm like, what? And all the other guys look at me like, what? And it's because I was disrespecting the veteran by putting the match together. And I tried to explain to him, and I'm like, I'm sorry, it's a Lucha Libre rules. I know the rules of Lucha Libre, and so does Rising. I don't even know how much Rising Sun knew it, but I knew it. So I was like, I tried to put together this match. He's like, okay, well, we're gonna be changing some things a bit, blah 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 blah. And so I mentioned the Lucha rules. So let me tell you something. I was not the captain, but I literally got pinned in all 3 falls of the match. And my team won the match.
Wait.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was telling you. You've been the captain or you've been the other 2 guys, your team wins. Yeah, see? Like the very first fall, Valentina is, she was in WSX and all that. It was like her first time ever in the business, and one of the spots was her giving me a swing DT off out of the corner in the match, and then led to me getting pinned by somebody else. I'm like, wow, this would be like the best match I ever had. I guess I wrestled the East of Arena, but it was one of the weirdest. I dare say worst match, because this is already a clusterfuck. Obviously, you tell me trying to tell the story. It's a giant clusterfuck, and Devin Storm was getting ready to kick my ass because I tried to make sense out of all it.
Oh man!
I remember at one point I had to apologize to him because he could have killed me on this. We did a spot where I was gonna give him a run up the top rope, and he powerbomb me out the top. Of course, I get beat up because that was my gimmick. And literally, got me ready to do the top. I thrust my crotch in his face, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, I'm sorry. He's like, oh, it's okay. And then he just dropped me, and I'm like, you could have fucking killed me on that. He didn't. He's a professional out there, but the fact when he said that, just the look amongst all the other 5 of us were like, what the fuck are you talking about? Why? He's trying to help us. I mean, that's how the other dudes looked at, because these other dudes are like, we don't know Lucha. I'm like, I gotcha.
Yeah.
That was one of the weirdest that's definitely probably the weirdest match I ever had. And MLW ended up doing pretty well there, obviously.
Yeah, I didn't realize MLW went back that far.
Their first show was like 2001. Yeah.
Wow.
They did shows up till around 03, maybe 04-ish, and then they stopped and they came back in, I think, 2016 or so, I believe.
Okay, I thought that's okay. That makes more sense then. Okay, I thought
the very first show, they actually tried to recreate the Shane Douglas throwing the belt down angle, if I remember correctly.
Oh, really?
The ECW double cross.
Yeah.
Okay.
I call this the touchy-feely question of the panel here. Your pure joy in wrestling, before the match, during the match, after the match, something that when it happens, you get the chills. You're like, I fucking love this business. This is why I love this business. What would that be?
I mean, obviously, if you're backstage and your music hits and they pop, you're going to get a natural rush from that, obviously. But, for me, when I was telling earlier about selling, if I'm selling and you get the crowd, you get that crowd, you get them, once you get there, you're like, fuck yeah, I got it. And it's like, you get the comeback and you do it right, you're like, this is going to be good. It's going to be worth everything that we're going through and all this. And just, that's a great joy. I'm like, okay, good. I had a good match, but it's a matter of having a great match and having the crowd completely engaged with that. It makes the match so much better. It's like, oh, great. I had a match where we did this, and this. Like, okay, cool. We hit all our stuff, but if it's crickets, it's like,
yeah,
what's that? But if you get the crowd completely engaged in it, it's like, okay, it's that much better.
Oh no, like Vinny
is my best example of that.
Like Vinny Massaro, when I interviewed him on here, he was like, his favorite thing was when he would do a vertical suplex and then the crowd would pop, and he'd be like, "Oh, it's gonna be an easy night tonight." He's like, "Oh man, I don't have to do anything too crazy tonight. This is awesome."
But our mentality was, for the most part, especially running Dragon, like players like, all right, we got all this stuff we're gonna do. We're gonna do all our stuff because we just want to just go out there and do our shit, you know.
Yeah.
And it's funny because then later, yeah, I mean, if people watch me wrestle, I have the one thing where I have the gimmick where like, oh yeah, I'm the big man, the best chest in the West, blah, blah. But at the same time, I do one match where I'm wrestling disco, doing like more lighter heart stuff. Then the next match I'm wrestling Dragon, where it's like, oh shoot, I can't do that goofy stuff because it's not gonna play into it well, you know. I had like a weird thing because my gimmick was, oh, I'm the big man, you know, but it doesn't work in that Super Dragon context. So I had to find the balance of it, you know.
And this is a pretty specific to you questions. I'm kind of just thinking of right now.
Yeah.
You know what you were there for the very beginning of PWG, and then you know you quit the business, brother. You were out of the business. But curious, did you regret it, or was there a moment that you might have had a tinge of regret when PWG got as big as it did?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah, absolutely. Like, because like I told you, literally, like the beginning of 2003, I said, I'm done. It's my last year. And I was like, I'm going to stick to it. Because you know what? There's been times where I'm like, oh, I'm so done. And I'm like, you know what? I don't want to feel like this again. And like if I keep going and a year later, I'm like, oh, I don't want to feel like this. I just want to have an end date and just be done with it. And my end goal is the mask match. It'll be the end of everything with me and Dragon. We'll make it great. And, you know, maybe it might have been better a year or two later in PWG, but, you know, hindsight's 2020. But the only thing where I was like, oh, shoot. For whatever reason, early Gorilla, I was really over, and I'm like, oh, this looks like it'd be fun. Because it wasn't like I was going to be wrestling Dragon. I might have been having fun wrestling other people. It's all going to be too serious. I'm like, oh, we can have some fun here. And then I saw, like, oh, they went to Europe. I would love to wrestle in Europe. Because I've never been to Europe. That was like the big one for me. It's like, going to Europe with the BWG guys would have been amazing. And the only other thing, like, my regret was I would love to have wrestled in Lucha Vavoom. Because that is, I refereed once, as Taro, which is just bizarre in of itself. And I was like, okay, well, it's the easiest crowd, and it's just fun, and there's like, you know, I'm like, gosh, look at this, there's hot chicks everywhere. I'm like, you know, like, wow, this looks like the most fun environment to go for wrestling. And it really is. Like, this day, it's like, I think, like, you know, people like, I think I was talking to like, Kevin, you're still such a wrestling guy. Like, yeah, but I'm going to go to PWG and I'm going to go to Lucha Vavoom. And, you know, I'm like, I have a hookup. I know people. I can just get in and hang out. You know, just hang out, have a beer. Sometimes I find a band that buys me a beer. Oh, yeah, I'll hang out and watch this stuff. It's fun. You know, it's all about having fun and just making the most of your wrestling experience.
Absolutely. Well, sir, I appreciate you very much being on the podcast. I definitely would love to have you on again. I feel like there's probably more stories in there to crack into at some point. But please put over the Beer and Baseball blogcast, please.
Self over. Hang on. I put my mask on, I'm going to put myself over, Daddy. Oh, yeah. Let me put myself over, Jack. Let's do it. Put myself over. God, this is so weird. Anyway, what phone I'm getting into, because I think this is my photo still on my Instagram and my Twitter. Because I'm like, yeah, why not? And I think I saw my photo as Taro when we first signed on here. On Twitter and Instagram, you can follow me at Luck and Lowell. That's LOKNLOLL. Whatever I'm getting into, music-wise, wrestling-wise. Not much these days, beer-wise, because obviously the beer thing's going to tie in. And nowadays, a passion project that grew out of Disco Sheet, Michael Mondragon, is called Beer Baseball, beerbaseballblog.com. But if you look up, Beer Baseball on Instagram, and I think it's Beer Baseball _ on Twitter. We do a live blogcast weekly at 6 p.m. on Tuesdays. It's Michael Mondragon is the host, myself, and Angelo Trinidad, who was former ring announcer at PWG primarily. That's where people might have seen him. And we just talk about craft beer, and we talk about baseball, and just do every week, and it's a great time, and people seem to enjoy it. So you can look that up we're live on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, you know. So just look at Beer Baseball. You'll probably find us, hopefully. Enjoy us for beer and baseball.
Thank you very much, sir. I appreciate you being on. You have yourself a good one.
Yeah.